4th, 2023, and I'm calling to order this regular session of the City of Bloomington Common Council. And I will invite Deputy Clerk Crossley to please call the roll.
Flaherty.
Here.
Rosenbarger. Here. Sims.
Here.
Piedmont Smith.
Here.
Scamboleri.
Here.
Rollo.
Here.
Sandberg.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
And Bolin.
Here.
Thank you. And I'll invite Vice President Piedmont Smith to continue with our land and labor acknowledgement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We recognize that the City of Bloomington sits on native land. The city, as well as city administrative buildings, are on the traditional homelands of the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people, and we acknowledge that they are past, present, and future caretakers of the land. We also acknowledge that much of the economic progress and development in Indiana and in Bloomington resulted from the unpaid labor and forced servitude of people of color, specifically enslaved African labor. We acknowledge that this land remains home to and a site of gathering and healing for many Indigenous and other people of color, and commit to the work necessary to create and promote a more equitable and just Bloomington. We move forward knowing and acknowledging our rich, complicated, and sometimes painful past so that we can learn from it and create a true land of opportunity.
Thank you. Continuing with an agenda summation for the evening, we have no minutes to approve, so we will move directly into reports, including reports from council members, reports from the mayor and city offices. There we will be hearing from the Housing and Neighborhood Development and Heading Home of South Central Indiana. We will hear any reports from council committees, and then we'll come to our first of two periods of public comment for the evening. We'll then take up appointments to boards and commissions, and then move into legislation for second readings and resolutions. We have three items there. The first is Resolution 2317 to initiate amendments to the city's comprehensive plan regarding leading pedestrian intervals and pedestrian recall phases. The second is Ordinance 2323 to amend Title 15 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Vehicles and Traffic regarding amending Section 15.12.010 stop intersections to remove a stop intersection from Schedule A and add a multi-stop intersection to Schedule B. Third item there is Ordinance 2322 to vacate public parcels regarding two 12-foot wide alley segments located between West 1st Street, West 2nd Street, South Rogers Street, and South Walker Street. City of Bloomington Redevelopment Commission petitioner. We'll then move into legislation for first readings. We have two items there. The first is Ordinance 2327 to amend Title 20 of the Unified Development Ordinance of the Bloomington Municipal Code regarding amendments set forth in Bloomington Municipal Code 20.03. We then have Ordinance 2328 to amend Title 15 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Vehicles and Traffic regarding amending Section 15.08.040 to update how temporary, experimental, or emergency traffic regulations may be made and enforced. Section 15.12.010 to add 3 stop intersections. Section 15.16.010 to amend the included intersections of one-way travel on Henderson Street. Section 15.24.020 to modify the posted speed limit on 17th Street. Section 15.32.030 to add back-in angle parking on Pete Ellis Drive. Section 15.32.080 to add no parking spaces on 8th Street, Swain Avenue, Wilson Street, Southern Drive, and 3rd Street. And to Section 15.32.090 to remove limited parking zones on Allen Street, 8th Street, Swain Avenue, and 3rd Street, and add limited parking zones on 3rd Street. Section 15.32.100 to add a loading zone on East Longview Avenue, and Section 15.32.110 to add a bus zone on 3rd Street. We'll then come to our second of two periods of public comment. We'll take up matters of council schedule, and then we will adjourn. So with that, we have no minutes for approval this evening, so we'll go to reports. And beginning with reports from council members, I'd like to start on Zoom with Councilmember Flaherty.
No report, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rosenberger.
No report, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sims.
No report, thank you.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I would like to report on the Justice Fiscal Advisory Committee that I was part of. This was a committee of the County Council, and the voting members were County Councilors Peter Iverson, Jennifer Crossley, and Kate Wiltz. And the city was represented by Mayor Hamilton, Beverly Callender Anderson, who's the director of the Community and Family Resources Department, and myself. And the final report was delivered, or was finalized, and I think delivered to the County Council on September 26th. So we had, I believe, 7 meetings from June 30th till September 18th. There were, in addition to the 3 voting members who were members of the Monroe County Council, there were several non-voting members, as I mentioned, 3 people from the city, additional members from the sheriff's office, from prosecutor's office, the public defender's office, from Centerstone, somebody with lived experience in the justice system, and perhaps a few others. In large part, our initial meetings were sort of like a study group. We were talking about ways to prevent people from getting involved in the criminal justice system, and then also ways in which people coming out of the system can have the best chance of not going back in. So we talked about diversion, re-entry into the community, and various community supports and services that would be needed for both. We had several guest speakers at our meetings, including Linda Grove-Paul from Centerstone, who she actually served on the committee as well, Jordan McIntyre from New Leaf New Life, Becca Streit from Probation, and various other speakers that had knowledge and expertise in these areas. The final report consisted of 34 recommendations. They were a little less focused. They were much broader than I thought they would be, and in general, the work of the committee was much broader than just the fiscal advice, which is, of course, the realm, the domain of the county council is fiscal. They are not a legislative body at the county government level. But the recommendations went far beyond the fiscal, and they were in several categories. First of all, systemic, looking at the system of community justice, looking at prevention, as I mentioned, that we talked about quite a bit, re-entry, probation, and other community corrections systems. We also looked at diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we can ensure equity within the system. And then we talked about, or some of the recommendations are also related to treatment of mental health and substance use disorders. And then a few were also about the future justice complex that is envisioned to go along with a new jail. So just some of the highlights from those recommendations. Let me get to the right page here. So we talked a lot about the importance of data to see how our community justice system is doing, especially in the realm of DEI. And this was brought to light by one of the consultants, Ken Ray, in the study that was done a few years ago. And so one of the recommendations is to establish a working group to identify data and to work with Monroe County Tech Services to develop a community justice dashboard. And then, as I mentioned, we talked about prevention and reentry, and a lot of that has to do with housing, which we're going to hear more about in the report from Hand and Heading Home. So funding new supportive, transitional, and affordable housing is an important part of community justice as well. At the same time, funding or continual funding for local crisis services, including the STRIDE Center and STRIDE mobile crisis teams, HealthNet, and the 988 resources that, well, are also run by Centerstone locally. So continued funding and collaboration with those services. And we talked quite a bit about a warm handoff when somebody gets out of jail, to make sure that they have the resources they need and the structure they need to try to resume their life and become productive and have a place to live and have a place to go. And New Leaf, New Life does a lot of that work, but their program is quite small currently. Some of the recommendations were in line with requests from the sheriff, Ruben Marte. One of his requests to the county council and the county commissioners is to create a reentry case manager position. And so that fit in well with what we had learned about preventing recidivism and reintegrating folks into the community. And it's hard to summarize 34 items in just a few minutes, but another one I wanted to mention is, of course, we did talk about fiscal impact and the fiscal impacts of creating a new jail and then gradually moving the support services and the other offices that are part of our community justice system to that location, and what would be involved with temporarily being at separate locations. Of course, as you probably know, the location of the new jail has yet to be determined. So that is my report from the Justice Fiscal Advisory Committee, and I'd be glad to share the website of their final report with the council as well. I can email that out.
Thank you. Councilmember Rollo.
I have no report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sandberg.
No report. Thanks.
Councilmember Smith.
No report, thank you.
And Councilmember Volen.
Yes, I have two reports. The first is that the Bloomington Public Transportation Corporation is ready and willing to discuss funding options to provide transit services outside of city limits. They have formed a team to discuss those options with respective entities. I have been asked to join this team along with Mayor Hamilton, John Connell, the General Manager of BPTC, James McClary, the Chair of the Board, and Kent McDaniel, a member of the Board. I will be happy to report to the Council as progress on that subject continues. Secondly, I've been reflecting on 2 decades of experience serving residents of a district that is part of 2 overlapping cities, the de jure city of Bloomington and the de facto city of the Indiana University campus, which has had an overwhelming influence on the district that I've represented since 2004. To that end, I'm going to be giving a public talk called Doppelganger Cities, A History of Campuses, How They Came to Compete with Municipalities, How They Hold Students Back from Adulthood, and How American Universities Must Rethink Their Physical Plants. The talk is sponsored by the IU Political and Civic Engagement Program and the Collins Board of Educational Programming. It will be held a week from tomorrow, Thursday, October 12th at 7:30 p.m. in Edmondson Hall at the Collins Living Learning Center at 10th and Woodlawn. The talk is free and open to the public. I hope you will all attend. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. With that, let's move to reports from the mayor and city offices. I believe we have Mr. Zodi with us to start us out from Housing and Neighborhood Development.
Thank you, President Scamboleri and members of the council. My role tonight, other than in case you have any questions, unless you have questions, afterward that I can help answer is just to simply introduce our friend Mary Morgan, who's the Director of Housing Security for Heading Home of South Central Indiana. I'll just remind the council, as she will, I'm sure, in one way or another, that the city's been a major partner in Heading Home's organizational efforts and continue to be, as well as our partners in county government. So with that, I'll introduce Mary Morgan, who I think has a presentation for you tonight, and appreciate your investment in this program.
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Morgan, and thank you for sharing your slides ahead of time as well. So,
Thank you. Excuse me. Good evening, council members. I'm Mary Morgan, Director of Heading Home of South Central Indiana, and I'm excited to be here tonight to give you an update on some of the work that we've been doing and to answer any questions that you might have. Just a little overview. We're going to be talking very briefly about our background and a couple of our major initiatives. I'm not going to go through all the things that we're doing, but I think these are two of the ones that are right now at the forefront of our work. And then talk about some of the community convenings that we've held that some of you have attended. Just a very brief reminder, many of you were involved in this when we started in 2020 by convening a working group that was led by United Way, the South Central Housing Network, Community Foundation, and of course the City of Bloomington and Monroe County. It was the group that formed our Heading Home strategic plan, which is kind of the guide star for the work that we've been doing so far. I joined the initiative as its first employee in December of 2021, so we're coming up on our 2-year anniversary. This is the advisory council that helps guide our work. There are 9 members representing our major funders and community partners. Some familiar faces that you see there, including Beverly Callender Anderson and John Hamilton from the City of Bloomington. We just had a retreat last Friday and are talking about our future, so this group is really important, and I think we'll probably be expanding in the future. And that's me, and Tatiana Wheeler. Her title is Assistant Director, but really I view her as a partner, and she has been instrumental in moving our initiatives forward. I wanted to just say for a moment that we are not a direct service provider. I think all of you understand that, but just for the public, we are working to drive long-term systemic change that will increase housing security for the people in our communities that call our communities home. We are often, as we're becoming a little bit better known, we're turned to sometimes for crisis response, and our role is really to take that longer view and some of those more difficult challenges, really trying to change the culture and the system of our housing crisis response system. I'm going to talk first about our Built for Zero initiative, because this is one of the things that we did out of the gate. The committee with the working group that formed Heading Home, the committee called Promising Practices, listed membership in Built for Zero as one of the prime opportunities, and we joined as a region in May of 2022. So we've just been a little over a year working with Built for Zero. To remind you, Built for Zero is a national, actually international movement working with over 100 communities to measurably end homelessness. It really provides a framework for our work and coaches, which have been invaluable in several of the initiatives that we've moved on. And these are all based on Housing First policies. And Housing First, as a reminder, is the policy where you put someone into a house or home quickly as possible, and all of their other needs can be addressed, but really having secure, stable housing is the crux of improving their lives. We're working towards functional zero, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it's really when your system is reducing homelessness by moving people more quickly into housing than are falling into homelessness. It's different measures for different populations, but I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about our efforts to decrease veteran homelessness. And just those pictures are from our conference in December, which some of our members went to, and then just our group getting together. We meet in person once a month and then several other times throughout the month as well. And these are our local team members. A couple of them are relatively new. Scotty Petrovich is our consultant with lived experience. We have others who are instrumental in shelter services and in healthcare. Melissa Burgess from HealthNet has been a relatively new addition to the team, and she's been great in communicating to us about changes that need to be made in street outreach, and particularly medical street outreach. There we go. One of the initiatives that I talked about when I met with you last year is our data dashboard. Honestly, I was hoping that we could have had that up far sooner. We've been working through some challenges with the data interface between one of our shelter providers and everyone else. We still haven't solved that problem completely, but we're going to go ahead and move forward with this dashboard because we feel like it's an important community project and public access to the data that we've all been working with, but will allow people to really see on a month-to-month basis changes that are happening in the system. Some of the metrics that it will include is active homeless numbers, and that's again a month-by-month metric. The number of housing placements, inflow and outflow, so the number of people moving into homelessness for the first time, or the number of people that are being placed into housing or leaving the community or other exits. The length of time from identification, so when somebody identifies a person or a person self-identifies as experiencing homelessness, how long does it take to move that person into housing? So those are just some of the things that'll be on the dashboard. By the end of the month is our goal now, and I just saw a prototype of it this morning, and we're very close. Veteran case conferencing is another initiative that we started in January, and this was a direct result of some coaching by the Built for Zero team, and it was discussed at a December 2022 conference that several of our local team members went to, and we decided to go ahead and try it here. It's really gathering all the different agencies and identifying people who are, in this case, are specifically veterans who are experiencing homelessness, identifying their barriers to housing, accessing resources from the VA and Volunteers of America and other sources, and really just trying to, in this very targeted population, move people as quickly as possible into housing. And since January, 16 veterans have been moved into housing, and 3 were diverted from shelter, meaning that we were able to problem solve with them and move them into either family situation or some other situation so that they did not become homeless. This group just met this afternoon. It meets every other week, or it's on the first and third Wednesday of the month. We've grown our veteran population. By that I mean that since we've been focusing on asking the case managers and outreach workers to identify veterans, our veteran homeless population has actually increased a little bit. Right now it stands at 12. We started out, it was significantly lower than that, but that's a good thing in our mind because we're able to specifically identify those folks who have access to resources but maybe didn't realize it. And so we anticipate that going forward, we'll be able to decrease that number significantly. Our goal is to reach functional zero for veterans by the end of next year. We think that's a really doable goal. The number that would be 3 or less veterans who are in our homeless response system over a 3-month period. So on each month over 3 months, if there are 3 or fewer veterans experiencing homelessness in our system, we will be designated as a community that has reached functional zero for veteran homelessness. It's a relatively small population, but what we're trying to do is to basically pilot this case conferencing approach so that we can apply it to other populations, perhaps families, perhaps elderly, perhaps chronic. Those will be decisions that'll be made at a later date. And I would also say that this is not the only thing that's happening in our community. Obviously, through coordinated entry and other means, people are still being, in all these other categories, are being moved into housing, but this is just a very targeted approach to see if we can make a significant difference in the length of time that people remain unhoused. The next thing I'm going to talk about is landlord outreach. We have started a new initiative, and we think there's a lot of potential for this. One of the data points that you've probably heard before is that of all the people in the community that have access to housing vouchers, 40% or so of those folks cannot find an apartment that will accept those vouchers. So we feel like working with landlords to increase the number of units that are available to people with vouchers is going to be a very powerful way to address that issue, because there are a lot of landlords who are already working in this space, and we want to basically use them to do additional peer-to-peer recruitment and increase the number of landlords and property managers who are on board with this. One way to do that is through the Landlord Risk Mitigation Fund. This is actually a project of the Bloomington Housing Authority. You heard from them earlier this year. Their first project for this was limited to the city of Bloomington. So we're providing some funding to expand that beyond the city limits of Bloomington to cover all of Monroe County. This is basically an incentive for landlords to accept folks with vouchers, providing as the title says, risk mitigation fund, so that if some damages are caused to the apartment that exceed the deposit, they can tap this fund to make repairs. It is relatively new, so we're still seeing how that works, but we're very optimistic for this. And thank you to the City of Bloomington for funding it. We partnered with some of our community partners this summer. I guess it was in August. Right, August. We wanted to, in some ways, change the typical rhetoric around landlords who are sometimes just viewed as the villains in this scenario. There are a lot of landlords and property managers that are doing good work, kind of above and beyond. So we held a breakfast with the purpose of celebrating those folks, sharing success stories, but also kind of providing some education about tools and resources that they have. And we view this as a kickoff to a landlord recruitment initiative that again, we feel like has great potential to open up more units for housing vouchers. Some of these ideas that we're exploring, we're creating a landlord task force with some of the landlords who are already in this work. We think that they are the best sources to guide this because they can identify some barriers that might prevent landlords from wanting to accept Section 8 housing vouchers. So peer-to-peer recruitment will open up more units, we think, and we're going to be providing some support resources, including a landlord-focused newsletter that is still in development. So talk a little bit about community convenings. We do a lot of that. One of the things that we found is that people are really eager to learn about what is happening in the space of the housing response system and network with each other. There haven't been a lot of opportunities for that in the past. And then also problem solve some solutions on a region-wide basis because, as a reminder, we're serving 6 regions. A lot of our work now is in Monroe County, but the other counties include Morgan, Owen, Lawrence, Greene, and Martin. And this is the same geographic area as the South Central Housing Network. So some of the things that we did, we held a council candidate learning session that some of you attended. We had a mayoral candidate forum focused on housing issues. In August, we had a learning session in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce, and Downtown Bloomington, Inc., which was really a way for people to learn about what things are being done to address housing insecurity, and also to be a platform for people to share, from the business community, to share some of their concerns. There's a follow-up meeting later this month that the Chamber is hosting that I'll be on the panel of, along with some other service providers, to continue that conversation. Another piece of community convenings that we do, we work a lot with training for case managers. Each of these agencies has needs that they themselves could address, but it's more efficient if we have a convening with on a topic where everybody can learn and then work with each other and network. So we've done, most recently in September, we did a data training. Data Today is Housing Tomorrow. That was really insightful, talking about the need for data to drive some of these decisions, because the frontline case managers honestly struggle with that. When you have somebody in crisis facing you, it's hard to say, I'm sorry, I have to go and enter this data into a database. So trying to make that connection between why data is important and the work to get people housed. We've done some on housing-centered case management. In January, we did a winter weather trauma session. So these are held quarterly. We have another one that's coming up in October. Judge Catherine Stafford is going to be talking about eviction law and landlord-tenant relations. So this is going to be geared not just for tenants, but also for landlords, to kind of learn about that process and what each group has, what rights each group has. We convene the weekly shelter meetings that all the shelter providers attend, as well as staff from the city, the county, public health, IU Health, and other agencies. And it's really just a touch base so that if there is an issue that comes up, whether it's a resurgence of COVID cases or other things that affect the shelters, we can talk about it there and problem solve. And then we provide support for the South Central Housing Network. And again, this is our region's continuum of care through which federal dollars flow. I sit on the board of that, and we provide support for that group's meetings, as well as the board meetings and the advocacy committee meetings. And just a reminder, one of our roles is to communicate about the work that's being done, not just by Heading Home, but by our agency partners and others. We have 3 different monthly newsletters. We have a general newsletter that I hope you saw that went out on Monday. We have in the second week of the month, we have a newsletter focused specifically on our People of Housing Security series. That is an effort to highlight the staff that are doing some of the frontline work in housing security. And then our third week of the month, we have a volunteer and advocacy newsletter. We're also active on social media. We have a news site on our website, which is headinghomeindiana.org. And then we give a lot of presentations to the community. Basically, any community group that asks us, we will go and speak with them. We've met with faith-based groups, business groups, others in other counties. So these are separate from the things that we ourselves convene. We just try to be responsive whenever anyone has questions about what our work is. And then this is just a highlight of some of the people of housing security that we've written about, just to show that we do nothing in isolation. We're working with partners all the time. And these are the people who are really making these changes happen. And because of them, our community, our region, has housed 193 people into permanent housing since January of this year. We're really excited about that. We hope you are too. This is not an easy challenge. This is systemic. It is societal. It is national. We value your vision in funding this initiative and are thankful for that. And we feel like we couldn't do it without the partnership of the city and all of our other partners. That is all that I have for you tonight. This is a picture that just brings me joy because although our work is serious, we love to celebrate. And those are our two interns, as well as me and Tatiana. My contact information, and I am happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. We are at time for this section of the agenda. Does the council wish to extend time and allow some time for questions? I'm seeing nods and I'm seeing head shakes. Is there a motion?
I move we extend for 5 minutes for questions.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we extend for 5 minutes to allow time for questions. Deputy Clerk Crossley, will you please call the roll on the motion to extend? And just by way of background for the public, because we have a member participating virtually tonight, all of our votes will be roll call votes. So,
Councilmember Flaherty,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Scambolery,
yes.
Rallo,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
and Bolin.
Yes.
Thank you.
That passes 9-0. We have an additional 5 minutes for questions. Councilmember Piedmont Smith, please go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly, because this is a really great statistic. So 193 people in the, 7-county area who were homeless, who were unhoused, have moved into permanent housing since January.
Correct. That is correct. It's a 6-county region, but the bulk of those folks are in Monroe, and to a lesser extent, Morgan and Lawrence.
And is this supportive housing or any type of
Any type
long-term?
of housing, so that could be permanent supportive housing, that could be moving back into a situation that they had previously, if they had family issues and they were homeless for a while, but then moved back into their family because of a diversion effort, or just finding vouchers using the rapid rehousing program, the resources that are in the case of the veterans, the HUD-VASH vouchers.
That's wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions? If not, I'll take a turn. Ms. Morgan, what is the total operating budget? Not the grant-making budget for Heading Home, but what's the total operating budget for Heading Home about?
So the city has provided 1.2 million. You've appropriated 1.5 million, but we have not received that yet. We have 1.2 million from the county, and then the county has also funded some funds that will be, they will not directly support an endowment, but they will be used to offset other costs so that the Community Foundation can work on an endowment for operations.
So those are operating dollars, not pass-through dollars that go on and are made as grants.
Right. So we did do a grant for the risk mitigation program, and that was $100,000, but in general, we are not a grant-making organization.
Okay, so the 2.6 million is your operating budget annually or total?
No, that is the ARPA dollars that need to be, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the word, by the end of committed? By 26, by 24, they have to be, okay, yeah. There's another word, it's slipping my mind. But by the end of 26, we'll have to spend all those dollars.
So the 2.6 million is a multi-year budget?
That's correct.
Got it. Thank you. Additional questions? Yes, Councilmember Smith.
Report. Appreciate all that you do. In your in the big environment, at a large view, is there an approach to substance abuse that is in this milieu of of what you're doing, and how does that work, or how is that
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, that is an issue that's called out in our heading home plan. Because these initial years were really focused on housing and kind of doing that foundational work, we haven't done much with substance use disorder. We did facilitate some conversations this summer with a group of folks who were interested in bringing a recovery cafe to Bloomington. It became clear that it was going to take a fair amount of our time to facilitate those conversations. So we asked the Monroe County Substance Use Disorder Commission whether they could take that on, and they agreed to do that. So we've what we're doing is trying to look for the best place for those kinds of initiatives to land and support them wherever we can. And we felt like we wanted to get the conversation off the ground, but it's kind of a gnarly conversation, as you might imagine, so.
Sure. I just, it seems like a really important thing these days to, that be rolled into all what we do with the homelessness situation.
I will say that I would say not the, maybe not a small percentage, but not a large percentage is interfacing with that issue. So there are a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness that don't have issues with substance use. So those might be more visible people that we see, but it's, not the entirety of the population.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Ms. Morgan, thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for your report. So that takes us forward to any reports from council committees. I'm not aware of any, but are there any? Okay. Seeing none, that takes us to our first period of public comment. This is for items not on our legislative agenda this evening. But may I have a show of hands in chambers as to who would like to offer comment this evening? Mr. Lucas, can you please extend our invitation on Zoom?
Yes, if any members of the public wish to speak, please use your raise hand feature to let us know. You can find the raise hand button in your control bar under the Reactions tab or the More tab. If you can't locate that, please send a chat to the meeting host.
Okay, and I'm not seeing any commenters here in chambers, is that correct? Okay.
I see no takers online.
Okay. Okay. That'll conclude our first of two periods of public comment. We'll circle back to that closer to the end of the meeting. That takes us to appointments to boards and commissions. Are there any this evening from Interview Team A? Interview Team B? Or Interview Team C? Okay. Seeing none, let's move on to legislation for second readings and resolutions.
Madam President, I move that Resolution 2317 be introduced and read by the Deputy Clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the Deputy Clerk please call the roll on the motion to introduce?
Councilmember Sims.
Yes.
Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
Scambolery.
Yes.
Rollo.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Volan.
Yes.
Rosenberger.
Yes.
And Flaherty.
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. Will the clerk please read? Or the Deputy Clerk please read?
Resolution 2317 to initiate amendments to the city's comprehensive plan. Reason leading pedestrian intervals and pedestrian recall phases. The synopsis is as follows. This resolution, sponsored by Councilmember Flaherty, directs the Planning Commission to prepare an amendment to the city's comprehensive plan consistent with the prioritization of leading pedestrian intervals and pedestrian recall phases as the default mechanisms, when feasible, at pedestrian crossings over which the city has exclusive control.
Thank you very much.
Madam President, I move that Resolution 2317 be adopted.
Second.
Thank you. Councilmember Flaherty, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I feel like the resolution is relatively self-explanatory in terms of its justification and impact. It is meant to be high-level policy guidance aimed at increasing safety for all street users, but especially some of the most vulnerable street users, pedestrians, and in particular, decreasing risks of death and serious injury at signalized intersections. This is a product of probably 2 years worth of conversations with multiple departments of city staff, engineering especially, who sort of controls the sort of implementation of the signal timing and phasing across the city, with the exception of a few intersections that are owned by NDOT, but also with planning staff who has a role in the sort of overall planning of the transportation system, and public works staff, streets division, which has a role in sort of operating and implementing changes to our signalized intersections. So the resolution calls for an amendment to the transportation plan within the next 300 days to come through Plan Commission. And that timeline was chosen on the basis of the update that's already in motion, to update, have a safety update to the transportation plan to, I think, allow us to be eligible for the Safe Streets for All grant program from the federal government. Council members may recall that a month or two ago, the council adopted similar guidance around the inclusion of the Council for Community Accessibility's set of principles that they forwarded to the council. So it's really trying to give direction to incorporate within that plan as policy guidance. But then the second aim is really to, and the timing here in particular, is on the basis of a study that is going to be underway soon with the engineering department to adjust the timing and phasing of all of our signals across the city. Essentially, I mentioned this took place over a couple years of conversations when I first approached, at the time, Neil Copper, interim city engineer, a few years ago, asking if we could incorporate more leading pedestrian intervals as an intervention at our intersections, especially where there was high pedestrian activity, because they have been statistically shown to significantly increase safety for roadway users and pedestrians in particular. It was a little more complicated than I anticipated, in that, of course, many of our intersections sort of speak to one another, they're timed together. The technology varies greatly across signals within the city. There's limited capacity on the streets division to systematically change, signals citywide. There's, I think, 90 some that we control. So all those factors made it complicated to address this in any sort of one-off situation. We have on occasion, and folks may have noticed, for instance, when we updated the intersection and signals at 3rd and Indiana, a leading pedestrian interval was included in that timing update. So, and just to clarify, what that means is that when before a light turns green, the pedestrian signal changes first, a couple seconds in advance, to give the pedestrian time to get into the intersection, which gives more visibility essentially to the pedestrian and reduces the risk that they're going to be sideswiped by a car turning. So I was advised by Neil Copper at the time that the appropriate time to incorporate guidance like this is really more at when we're systematically looking at the timing and phasing and are contracting with a firm to do that update. So that is in process now. I've been working with Andrew Seabour over the past probably 6 to 9 months, again, as well with planning and public works. I think through some iterative process with the language in the resolution, we've arrived at somewhere we're all happy with. I'll just note that this is about prioritizing an approach. It's not a mandate. It is not prescriptive in the sense that it requires this at any one intersection. It recognizes that it's broadly in line with goals we already have in our transportation and comprehensive plans, and still leaves to the city engineer and their judgment ultimately at each intersection what combination of features should be included. And I think that is probably all I have to say on it. I would definitely invite input from city staff as well. I think Mr. Seabour may be on the call to share input, and then also happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Seaboard, did you want to comment?
Good evening, Andrew Seabour, City Engineer. I think just echoing a lot of what Councilmember Flaherty just said, we have engaged in a lot of conversations over the last several months, multiple city departments, and am supportive of his proposed resolution. I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Thank you. Questions from council? Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
Yes, just for the benefit of the public, could Councilmember Flaherty, could you explain what the second part of the policy guidance is about pedestrian recall phases?
Sure. The difference between a pedestrian recall setting at an intersection versus an actuated signal is one where you have to push a button to have a pedestrian signal appear versus it automatically appearing, essentially. And so having a pedestrian signal automatically appear can help increase predictability as well as safety and convenience for pedestrians who are trying to prioritize within our transportation system per our plans. Because I'm sure most folks have experienced this. If you walk up to an intersection and perhaps forget to press a button that is there and it's an actuated signal, or you arrive a second or two after the signal has already changed and no one had been there to press the button, in many cases, if it's an actuated signal, a no walk sign would remain, sort of putting pedestrians at an odd choice to make as to whether to cross parallel with the traffic as they would expect to be able to do in that situation, or but again having a conflicting signal essentially from the no walk sign that's displayed. So where possible, again, prioritizing pedestrian recall as a setting that essentially the pedestrian go sign would automatically come up. I'll just note that having audible signals where folks can push a button and get feedback orally, who may be visually impaired, are still important and part of the suite of measures that we expect to utilize and have where possible in intersections. So it's not that will necessarily go away because that's another function, but where we can reasonably include the automatic inclusion of a pedestrian sign called pedestrian recall, calling for that as well.
Councilmember Rollo.
This is a question for staff for Director Seabour. Just as a point of information, was some years ago the question came up when Susie Johnson was Director of Public Works about pedestrian actuated signals, and she said that they were all automatic except for hawk signals. Are they actuated by human beings? I know they're there to be actuated, but I was surprised to find out that they were automatic.
Yeah, good question. So in some locations, the pedestrian walk indication comes up automatically. That's the pedestrian recall phase that Councilmember Flaherty just described. Generally right now that exists downtown. For example, when our signals are very repetitive, there's not much fluctuation in traffic patterns, it's very predictable. But as you get outside and more into the fringes or where there's lower volume intersecting roads or less pedestrian activity, then it tends to be more based on needing that actuation for a pedestrian to activate that phase.
Okay, so both exist?
Both exist.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Councilmember Volin.
Just to clarify, Mr. Flaherty, when you said that you've been considering this for a couple of years, when did talks with city staff begin in earnest for you on this topic?
Quite literally a couple of years ago. I would say there was some hiatus. I had maybe a couple of conversations in 2021 with Neil Copper, who I mentioned was the interim city engineer at the time, still employed with the department. And through those conversations, was sort of guided that incorporating this into a systematic update might be a better approach. So then there was sort of I would say a pause, maybe a 1-year hiatus, and then re-engaging with Mr. Seabour probably early this year. I tend to have conversations with Mr. Seabour maybe once every couple of months about a variety of transportation-related issues, and I forget exactly which meeting I brought this back up. But essentially, when I learned that we were going to be initiating another signal timing and rephasing study, I was interested in working with him to ensure that there was guidance going into that study's development, and since it will precede any potential transportation plan safety update, I wanted to include this in the form of a resolution coming from the council to help clarify and support.
Mr. Seaborn, maybe you can clarify. To what extent is this update to the transportation plan coinciding with funding in the 2024 budget for traffic signal modernization and replacement?
Yeah, I think there maybe is a lot to unpack there. In my mind, they're maybe separate, but the timing is similar.
Is it coincidental, or is it because you know that maybe there's funding to be had that to implement the plan that you're looking to implement it? That's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
The two things, the budget requests for upgrading signal equipment. I think Public Works also has budget requests for additional staffing for traffic-related expertise, and as does engineering. I think it's a little bit coincidental that those are in next year's budget in addition to the Safe Streets for All funding application. I think both would happen independently, but it's nice that they are happening at the same time.
Just to follow up on your comment about Safe Streets for All, there's a separate pot of money called for in this budget that would trigger federal funding. Would the traffic signal modernization not be related to leveraging federal funds, or how does that work?
Good question. So maybe I'll try to describe a few different things that are happening. One is that we are getting close to finalizing a contract with a design consultant to implement the citywide signal retiming project. That project has federal funding in this current year's budget. So that is going to happen. We also have a budget request next year, what Public Works does, to essentially upgrade signal equipment technology. So that's push buttons, that's some new cabinets, that's additional detection that will help enable some of the features that this resolution is asking us to do. And then there are separate things ongoing in relation to the Safe Street for All plan and budget.
So it's safe then to characterize Mr. Flaherty's proposal as whenever you do have the funds, we should do things in this way. And it's not that he's making this request in anticipation of directly tied to the funds. This is good policy, and we're in the process of doing this, and he's trying to make sure that this type of signalization is implemented once you get to it. Is that a safe way to characterize it?
I think so. I'd let him speak to it too, but I think the primary driver is that we do have that citywide signal retiming project that is just about to kick off.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Additional questions? Okay. Councilmember Sims.
Thank you, and thank you both for your presentation. It's been stated there's no fiscal impact anticipated, and mainly because some parts of it are already budgeted. Now, not specifically what we're talking about, but parts of the signalization. I guess my question is, it's going to have to be part of the budgeting process in oncoming years. So how long do we anticipate, if it's a prioritization of the funds, so it won't have a different fiscal impact? How many years do we think that we can complete this project?
Sure. I think I'm comfortable saying that this resolution has essentially a negligible fiscal impact because we would be aiming to implement it with a project that we already have funded and will be implemented next year with our consultant team. I think if we didn't have that project and we were doing this in a less systematic way, it would require additional staffing, resources, and time. And so then I think I would answer it differently. But because we already have that and we're doing it anyway, I think we just work it into that.
How many are we budgeted during the next budget cycle as part of what's already been or proposed to budget for next year?
And maybe I missed, can you restate the question? I'm sorry.
Okay, there's a proposed budget amount for the signalization project.
Yes.
Okay, and based on that proposal, not that it's been approved or anything, how many of these signalizations projects do you think can be accomplished next year?
I think
the next fiscal budget year, yes.
The next fiscal budget year, I guess maybe there's a couple separate things that are happening.
Yes.
Next year's budget, I know speaking specifically to engineering, we have a request, we're going to try to start modernizing 2 intersections, 2 signalized intersections, and that's more significant upgrades. Public Works has a request to more broadly address technology needs at some of the intersections with older cabinets and controllers and such. That is probably a much bigger number and spread throughout the community, and I don't have that specific dollar figure in mind.
Okay, thank you. May I continue? Go ahead. I'm sorry, Matt. Councilman.
Yeah, I'll just add to that the way I am thinking about this is that it's a policy-informed decision that's being made about how to program each intersection, and the context of the study that is including funding for implementation of that programming. The consultant or a partner will do that. So what decision you're making about how to program it doesn't affect the fact that it will be programmed. That's going to happen regardless of whether or not this resolution passes, regardless of that guidance. It's really just a policy question of how to time the signal. But the fact that it's going to be implemented is already budgeted for, even in, I think, the already approved budget. I think it may extend into next year, but I know that study's already been requested, and I think contracts signed or close to being signed for this fiscal year.
So this new style pedestrian signal was coming regardless of this resolution.
Well, retiming the city's signals citywide and doing a study and a systemic update to that. Yes, that was already coming. And that's why I chose to bring the resolution at this time, so it could inform the policy decisions going into that implementation that was already planned.
Okay, thank you. I have more, but I can wait till the second round if there's others.
Additional round 1 questions? Seeing none, Councilmember Sims, go ahead.
Thank you. Part of this resolution says, in order to avoid a duplication of efforts and to align this proposed amendment with upcoming efforts. I guess I'm wondering, what are those duplicative efforts? Or potentially, what are some of the duplications that will be avoided by this resolution?
If, for instance, this guidance was not on the radar of the engineering department at the time of the implementation of the study, and then after that, a transportation plan amendment came that said, hey, we want to do pedestrian recall and leading pedestrian intervals in the downtown overlay, and that hadn't already been done and engineering hadn't incorporated that, it could lead to additional work and fiscal impact on the back end, then essentially needing to go back and revisit some of the decisions that were made. Or second, I would say the avoidance of duplicative effort is the choice I made in working with engineering 2 years ago to not try to move forward on guidance then, because that would have required additional effort that really wasn't within the capacity or of the city engineering department and public works at that time. So it was sort of waiting intentionally to align this policy guidance at the same time that the study was happening. The fact that the transportation plan safety update is happening shortly after is a little bit of just a quirk of timing. And I think all the more reason to sort of incorporate this guidance that applies to both now.
Okay, thank you. One more.
I'm not seeing any others, so go ahead and then we'll go to public
Okay.
comment.
And as we go further, first, I do want to say I do support this resolution and its intentions. But one last question that I do have. Resolutions, as I understand it, are non-binding. And I don't think this will be. But I do see there's words like must, and it changes the Plan Commission's submission time from 60 days, 60 days to 300 days, which is more than non-binding. In fact, it kind of sounds a little bit binding. And I'm not so sure that's the intent, but that wording, does that make sense? It's one thing to say you shall or you can, but it's another to say you must have, the city must give consideration to the general policies. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with it, I just seeking clarification.
I can attempt to clarify, and then might also call on council staff. Generally speaking, when we talk about resolutions, they are non-binding statements of preference in the council. That might not be true in all cases. I think they might have, legal impact in some cases, including directing a change to the comprehensive plan, which might be the case here. And so the only must I'm seeing in the ordinance is the fourth whereas clause that references Indiana code, section of Indiana code. It says each amendment to the comprehensive plan must be approved according to the procedures set forth in the 500 series, which is a reference to the section, and then goes on to say that the Common Council may direct the Plan Commission to prepare an amendment to the comprehensive plan. And I think that direction is given by resolution. So the Plan Commission, I think, is directed to take this up, and a resolution is the formal mechanism to do that. Even though we have normally colloquially sort of referred to resolutions as non-binding, I think this might be different or an exception, but I would invite council staff to correct me if I'm incorrect about that or share additional context.
Stephen Lucas, council administrator and attorney. I think that's all correct, and the 60 days mentioned in the resolution is the default amount of time that state statute gives to a plan commission to prepare an amendment after an amendment has been requested by the council. And so if the council were to adopt this resolution and not say anything further, the Plan Commission would have 60 days to respond, prepare an amendment to the comprehensive plan, hold a public hearing, and then provide a recommendation back to this council. Given that this council has adopted in the last couple of months a separate resolution calling for an amendment to the transportation plan on accessible mobility and transportation principles, along with, I believe, a planned update that Planning and Transportation has been looking to bring to the Plan Commission early next year. This resolution recognizes that all those things are happening and is hoping to give the Plan Commission sort of a chance to bundle all of these things into one comprehensive plan or transportation plan amendment. And that's why it extends the time for them to prepare this from 60 days to 300 days. So their obligation to prepare an amendment is triggered by the passage of this resolution, but this would give them additional time given all the other things that they're being asked to look at.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just echo, I mean, that's for efficiency's sake. So it's pragmatically realizing that any amendment to be developed by the Plan Commission would functionally be developed by staff, recognizing that there's already an effort to update, do a safety update to the transportation plan in motion. It is seeking efficiency by essentially folding this into that effort.
Thank you, gentlemen, for clarifying. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Volin.
For Mr. Seabour, what were the two intersections that engineering is looking, or Public Works is looking to improve the two old signalized intersections?
I don't know yet, I guess is the honest, those would be projects we would start the design phase of in next calendar year. And essentially we're just put in the budget request to do that.
The two which are most in need?
It's the two most in need, but factoring in there are other ongoing initiatives in the city, so we wouldn't want to do two if there's an ongoing study and we don't know what those roads will look like. Generally, like we have maybe 90 signalized intersections, so if we did 2 a year, that means the signal's going to get upgraded every 45 years. So that's just us trying to get an ongoing maintenance effort.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any additional round 2 questions? Seeing none, let's go to public comment. If there is anyone in chambers who would like to offer comment on Resolution 2317, please go ahead and approach the podium. And Mr. Lucas, can you extend our invitation on Zoom, please?
Yes, if there are members of the public that wish to speak to this item, please raise your hand in Zoom. You can do that by clicking the raise hand button in your control bar under the reactions tab or the more tab. You can also send a chat to the host to let us know you'd like to speak.
Okay, thank you. And let's start here in chambers. If you would, please share your name for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Paulie Tyracone. I'll be quick. I just want to voice my support for this resolution. I think it's a really low-hanging fruit for street safety and street users in Bloomington. and it can give a lot more benefits, especially to people who need extra time for crossing, and make sure that they're at least in a more comfortable, visible, especially space, whenever the rest of traffic begins crossing. So I think we should definitely prioritize this effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lucas, do we have anyone on Zoom? Okay, seeing none, let's come back to chambers then. Welcome, and again, please share your name for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening. I am Olivia Young. I'm the co-director of City Relations for Indiana University Student Government. We deeply care about issues surrounding city development and bettering the city's policies, and we believe in the continual effort to make transportation and city services more accessible and efficient for all residents in Bloomington, including IU students. Resolution 2317 is supported by IU Student Government because it will help the many students that use traffic stops on a regular basis. Making a priority for pedestrian walkways and pedestrian recall phases to be used in the city of Bloomington will create a more pedestrian-friendly system for students, enhance accessibility, and improve overall safety for both drivers and students. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Mr. Lucas, has anyone popped up on Zoom?
Not that I see, no.
Okay, in which case, let's come back to council for any additional questions or final comments. Councilmember Rosenberger.
Thank you. I'll be supporting this resolution. I did also just look up sort of how long this has been talked about in council after Council Member Volan's question. But we talked about doing this also around the no turn on red in downtown and the in campus mapping a couple of years ago that we passed in April 2021, but it was too cumbersome of a project to add in at that time. So I think it is nice that we've been talking about it, and it's just another one of those Vision Zero strategies that will help us hopefully lead to no traffic fatalities. Thanks.
Thank you. Additional comments? Councilmember Piedmont Smith, and then Councilmember Volan.
Yes, I am in support of this resolution, and I thank Councilmember Flaherty for working on it and bringing it forward. I would be in favor regardless, but for me it's kind of personal because I live right near the intersection of Rogers and Patterson and Grimes, and there is no pedestrian recall phase at that intersection. And if you push the button, you could be waiting several minutes, because if you're just at the tail end of when there would be a pedestrian crossing light, then you're out of luck. There are a lot of left turn lights at that intersection, so if you don't push the pedestrian button, then you are kind of risking it, because you could be crossing with the traffic, but there might be somebody coming with a left turn. So anyway, I'll be looking forward to that particular intersection being improved. Not that it should be prioritized, but I think certainly pedestrian recall, like an automatic sequence that pedestrians cross at this time, is an important priority, as well as the leading pedestrian lights to give people time to head across the intersection before it's blocked by a bunch of cars moving through it. So I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Volan.
Yes, I'm also supportive of the policy change. It's an important prioritization of pedestrians in a country and a long era where we've prioritized motor vehicles over all of the forms of traffic. So I've already seen the impact of the pedestrian interval at the corner of 3rd and Indiana, and it's effective and it's helpful, and we need to do more of it. But if my questions have had any particular point, it's that $2.7 million is being proposed in the 2024 budget for traffic signal modernization and replacement. So it's soon going to be put to the test, and all that money is coming from former CREED funds, which would be current CREED funds, but they're former. By my count, there are 49 blocks and at least 16 signalized intersections in the former Creed, downtown Creed district, it makes no sense to me why those shouldn't be prioritized with money that was generated from within that district. So I'm going to be, I have been in the process of proposing an amendment to make sure that money is channeled, but that is for next week. I just wanted to make it clear why I was asking those questions. The issue of which two intersections, I mean, those intersections reflect at least a sixth of the city's overall inventory of signalized intersections. I see no reason why they shouldn't be prioritized first if we're going to spend that much money from that was generated among those intersections. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Seeing no others, I'll finish up quickly. I'm happy to support this resolution. I appreciate the thought and the analysis that went into it, and especially the citations included. So much appreciated there. I always appreciate public comment, but I especially want to acknowledge IU student government weighing in on this. Thank you for that. And again, I'm happy to support this resolution. So with that, Deputy Clerk Crossley, that's hard to say, Deputy Clerk Crossley, will you please call the roll on Resolution 2317?
Councilmember Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Scambolery,
Yes.
Rollo,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Volan,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
and Sims.
Yes.
Thank you.
That passes 9-0. Thank you, everyone.
Madam President, I move that ordinance 2323 be introduced and read by the deputy clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the Deputy Clerk please call the roll on the motion to introduce?
Scambolery,
Yes.
Rollo,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Volan,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
and Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
That passes 9-0. Will the Deputy Clerk please read?
Ordinance 23-23 to amend Title 15 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Vehicles and Traffic regarding amending Section 15.12.0.0 stop intersections to remove a stop intersection from Schedule A and add a multi-stop intersection to Schedule B.
And the synopsis, or what was that? Okay.
Sorry. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance amends Title 15, Vehicles and Traffic of the Bloomington Municipal Code and comes forth at the request of city staff, the Traffic Commission, and Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Commission. The ordinance makes the following change: replaces a stop intersection with a multi-stop intersection on 7th Street.
Thank you. And Mr. Seaboard? Oh,
Madam President, I move that ordinance 2323 be adopted.
oh, my fault. Thank you.
All right, good evening again. Andrew Seaboard, City Engineer. I'm here to present Ordinance 2323, which proposes a Title 15 update to codify the intersection of 7th Street and Dunn Street as an all-way stop. Given the interest in the 7-line project and to provide some context for this ordinance, I'll also provide a summary of how we got here and highlight some of the early trends we're seeing along the corridor. To build on the success of the B line and to enhance the city's active transportation network, the need for a high-comfort east-west facility was identified in the city's transportation plan and funded as a bicentennial bond project. 7th Street was identified as the corridor to create this important facility through a protected bicycle lane project. Construction of the project was substantially complete in 2021, connecting downtown Bloomington to the heart of IU's campus. As a part of the project development process, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Commission, the Traffic Commission, and the Parking Commission reviewed the project and made recommendations to the City Council that led to a unanimous approval of Ordinance 20-14. That ordinance effectively approved a reduction of on-street parking along the corridor to create room or space for the protected bicycle lane and remove stop signs at a series of intersections along the corridor. Earlier this year, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Commission and Traffic Commission heard an update on the project, and both bodies voted to support a code change to reinstall always stop at the 7th and Dunn Street intersection. Given the crash trends at that intersection, a 180-day order was issued, and the stop sign has been in place at that intersection since April 12th. As we consider the slides beyond this, I think it's highly important that we all keep in mind why those stop signs were removed as a part of the project. In short, a traffic study was completed as a part of the project that found the stop sign removal did not negatively impact the level of service on the minor street intersections, and that 7th Street could be prioritized as a desired east-west route for all, especially for transit and bike lane users. Now, transitioning to some trends we are seeing since the project has been completed. This slide captures annual average bicycle lane traffic on 7th Street adjacent to IU's campus. This data is collected daily with a permanent traffic counter. As summarized, the count reflects a 25% increase in activity since the 7-line project was completed. It's important to note this growth reflects a combination of more people choosing to use a protected bicycle lane than the standard bicycle lanes that existed on this segment before the project, and the efforts associated with building a more comprehensive network of bicycle infrastructure. I need to note that we discovered this counter is not able to count scooter traffic, and based on observations and testing, we estimate the actual traffic in the protected bike lane is 20 to 25% higher than the counts reflects. Given scooters were generally not present much in the pre-project years, the growth in usage as a result is greater than this table summarizes. When we look at bicycle count comparisons in an area of the project that did not previously have bike lanes, we see a significantly greater gain in bicycle traffic. I recognize this data is less robust than a permanent bike counter, and that should be taken into consideration, but the data highlights the project's impact. This table does not include a count that was conducted in the same area last month, given differences that we might expect through seasonal variations. But just for reference, last month, so September, we found 144 bike lane users in that same 4-hour window in that corridor. One concern we have heard since removing the always stops revolves around pedestrian accessibility. That being said, the data we have suggests pedestrian activity appears to be up based on some limited count information. Additionally, accessibility has been enhanced with the project through construction of 59 accessible curb ramps and the removal of numerous sidewalk trip hazards. Additionally, the number of pedestrian crashes has actually decreased along the corridor post-project, and there have been no reported pedestrian crashes at any of the stop-controlled intersections. Looking specifically at automobile traffic, upon review of 3 multi-day counts on 7th Street between Grant and Dunn since the project was completed, we found that speeds are greater than desired, which suggests the majority of drivers are comfortable driving in the 10-foot travel lanes. Additionally, we observed a slight decrease in speeds at the count location since the always stop was installed at Dunn Street. We're also able to evaluate traffic volume impacts and found that where stop signs were removed and bike lanes added, traffic increased on the corridor. Whereas on the side streets, where it is now more challenging to cross or enter 7th Street, traffic volumes appear to have decreased. On the flip side, since reinstalling the always stop at Dunn, we have seen an increase in traffic on that facility. Finally, the last metric we're able to assess are number of reported crashes. This chart illustrates the number of total crashes along the corridor by quarter. Despite summarizing this data by quarter, I want to note that typically the smallest time increment we review when looking at crash data is a year. And ideally, we would have more data to review when evaluating these things. We are illustrating pre-project crash trends on the left side of this chart. We grayed out the area in the middle, reflecting COVID and construction timeframes, and post-project crashes are to the far right. You can see pre-project, the corridor as a whole averaged just over 6 crashes per quarter. Post-project, we were averaging over 10, a concerning trend. Upon further review, we found that after the project, we saw a significant decrease in the number of some type of crashes, like side swipes and parking-related crashes, but we were seeing an increase in crash trends at the intersections where always stop was removed. I want to make it clear that it does not appear we are seeing an increase in crashes due to the construction of a protected bike lane. Since reinstalling the always stop at Dunn Street, you can see a positive trend of fewer reported crashes on the corridor. This is a similar chart of quarterly crashes, but focuses just on injury crashes. Like total crashes, the rate of injury crashes has increased post-project. And finally, a last quarterly crash chart focused on total bike, pedestrian, and scooter crashes. Keep in mind, we are also seeing a bit of an increase in these crashes, but it's important to consider there is a significant increase in these users, and that a few years ago, scooters were not a common thing to observe in Bloomington. For example, there were no reported scooter crashes on the corridor prior to the 7-line project, but we have seen multiple scooter crashes post-project. This graphic illustrates the intersection-related crashes at the intersection of 7th Street and Dunn Street. Like prior crash graphics, the x-axis reflects time, and each vertical line or tick mark illustrates when a crash occurred. As you can see, this location averaged about 1 intersection-related crash per year before the project, but saw a significant increase after the project. Since the always stop was reinstalled, the crash pattern has improved, with only 1 reported crash occurring, and it was in that short adjustment window soon after the always stop was installed. In summary, I believe the 7-line project successfully improved east-west mobility and accessibility, and request your approval of Ordinance 2323 to maintain the always stop control intersection that's in place at 7th Street and Dunn Street. The 180-day order that is in place is set to expire on October 9th. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Not yet. Let's do questions and then amendment. Are there questions from council? Okay. Seeing none, I believe we have an amendment.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Seaboard. Was I understanding your first reported corridor total crashes that there was an increase post-construction and then a decrease over the last few quarters, and that's corridor wide, so that our current crash rate per quarter along the entire corridor project is roughly the same as it was prior to the project being initiated. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct based on just 2 quarters of data. And like I said, ideally we'd be looking at a longer range of at least a year. But based on, you saw the graphic of 7th and Dunn, we had a very high number of crashes. A big reason for the corridor-wide increase was that intersection specifically. And so the number of the trend corridor-wide has decreased.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions for Mr. Seaboard? Okay. Councilmember Rallo?
I move Amendment 1 to Ordinance 2323.
It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Rallo, please go ahead.
Yes. Well, what this ordinance consists of, amendment consists of is removing the stop intersections or amending them by deleting them from Schedule A, that is, shall stop for traffic on 7th Street for Dunn, Lincoln, and Morton and Washington Streets, and adding in Section 2, stops intersections shall be amended by adding the following to Schedule B, which is 7th Street and Dunn will be a 3-way, 7th Street and Lincoln is a 3-way stop, 7th Street and Morton a 4-way stop, and 7th Street and Washington a 3-way stop. So the reasoning for this amendment is the current situation on 7th Street doesn't provide for stop signs between Walnut and Dunn for pedestrian crossing with a stop sign on 7th Street. So it's concerned me, and it's been the subject of constituent concern as well. I would also direct your attention to the traffic study report, where the crash data did indicate that there was an increase of stops, albeit in the last few quarters it's decreased, but engineering recommended re-implementation of all-way stops at the 5 intersections where they were removed. So besides Dunn Street re-implementation of an all-way stop, which is the subject of this ordinance, this amendment re-implements all-way stops on 3 of the 4 remaining intersections. My principal aim is for safe pedestrian crossing, but it also addresses the crash hazard at Washington and Lincoln Streets. I included Morton Street because of the heavy pedestrian crossing, especially during events like Farmers Market. And it's also been requested by a number of constituents. I chose not to place an all-way stop in this amendment at Grant Street because there is the ability to cross, if this amendment were to pass, at Lincoln and at Dunn Street, which allows bicycles to proceed unimpeded between Lincoln and Dunn. So that's my introduction of the amendment. Happy to take questions, and I think Mr. Seabour is prepared to take questions too.
Mr. Seabour, did you want to respond to Amendment 1?
At this point, I don't have anything to share, but I am more than happy to answer any questions council may have.
Okay. Questions on Amendment 1? Councilmember Sandberg, then Councilmember Volin.
Thank you. This is for you, Mr. Seabour. As all of us are concerned about safety for all types of users of our roadways, certainly pedestrians, certainly vehicles. There are sightline problems. I know that for a fact as someone that crosses frequently. Could you address, and I know you've already said that with 2 quarters of data, we really don't have enough to be definitive about the crash data. But could you speak just a little bit about, of all the places that are being reintroduced to put stop signs back that would govern and have more predictability in when do people stop and when can they go? Can you offer any opinion about what engineering would think about adding these stop signs back with respect to eliminating some of the crashes that are occurring?
Yeah, I'll take a stab, and I'm happy if there's to provide more if I'm not answering everything fully. How do I want to answer this? So I know when this originally went to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Commission and Traffic Commission, and I could pull up other graphics too, we showed those charts where you saw by quarter, and then what we found was there's another color code where I can show how many of those were related to always stop removal and what we might expect if they were all reinstalled as always stop. And so now I think we're at about 6 crashes per quarter, which what we were at prior to the project. And based on that analysis, I think we'd be closer to the 3 or 4 crashes per quarter if all were reinstalled. So that is a potential metric that could be considered. So there would be further crash reduction likely.
Yeah, and in terms of slowing traffic, and I know there's controversy about stop signs. They're not a preferred method of traffic calming or slowing. But could you venture an opinion about what that might do to stop some of the freeway mentality that might be going on now, since all the 4 ways have been removed?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, I don't see stop signs as a means to calm traffic, but when stop signs are warranted for other reasons, in the vicinity of a stop sign, we do expect volumes or speeds to slow, and I showed some of that data when we're half block away from a stop sign. At that point, speeds did slightly decrease, but if we probably went a little further, we probably wouldn't really see much of a change. But if we had a corridor of always stops, I think it's reasonable to expect the speeds would decrease along the corridor, and just in that urban context.
Thank you.
Councilmember Volin.
Mr. Rallo, how many constituents would you say caused you to create this amendment?
Oh, I probably less than 10, but we have constituent meetings regularly, Councilmember Sandberg and I, and it was brought to my attention that especially people who are older are challenged by crossing without a stop sign, and so it was brought to my attention by them.
Okay,
and since then I've heard from a number.
Last I checked, the 7 line was in District 6. I've had no constituent complaints about it. If your constituents can complain about the 7 line, why is it that people outside of the Hawthorne-Weatherstone Greenway shouldn't be able to complain about that green space? I mean, like, that's the argument I heard about Hawthorne-Weatherstone. The people living there should have had as much or more say. Here now is an amendment inspired entirely by constituents who are not from District 6 or from outside the district. What should I think?
Did I ever say that people outside of District 4 shouldn't comment on the Hawthorne-Weatherstone Greenway?
Well, all I know is that
I don't think I ever said
that was in your
that.
district, and that
Yeah.
many of your constituents were upset about it. I'll withdraw the question. Mr. Seaboard, I'd like you to put up the slides that you just showed. Can you clarify how many accidents were caused by cars versus bicycles and scooters? Can you show us those slides again?
Sure, I'll show the. So this is the total crashes along the corridor by corridor. I have other ones I can pull up if you'd like. I would say the vast majority of these crashes are caused by drivers on the minor stop-controlled street.
On the minor street?
On the minor street, not 7th Street. This is a generalization that fail to yield to traffic on 7th Street. So it's generally drivers making poor choices or not doing what legally they're required to do.
Can we also see I'm noticing that these are 6 to 10 events per quarter, and show us the bicycle and pedestrian. So here is, on average, less than 1 a quarter.
Correct.
And how could you characterize how these accidents are happening? What's happening here?
Yeah, I think it's probably a pretty good mixture of vehicles turning across a space that might be used by bicyclists or scooters, and there's also a mixture of scooters. I'm thinking of a couple or cyclists that maybe were not doing what they legally should have been doing.
So some of these are also caused by cars?
Some of these, yes.
Okay, so when you say bike, ped, scooter crashes, they're simply crashes that involve and are not necessarily a causal effect.
Correct. This has nothing to do with cause. It's just that these are crashes that involved a bicycle, a scooter, or a pedestrian.
So then the other slide involved just crashes of cars without necessarily any, in other words, are the pedestrian crashes a subset of this slide?
The pedestrian crashes would be a part of this slide. So this is all. This includes everything.
Okay, so the real problem is cars driving too fast. I have one more follow-up question. So we have on other occasions used a variety of different methods for trying to tame problems like this. I've seen blinking lights and flags. In fact, especially reintroducing stop signs at 7th and Dunn. Could blinking lights and flags not be placed on, say, Lincoln or Grant to give drivers greater warning that the condition they may have been used to no longer applies? Wouldn't that not be a simpler way without reintroducing stop signs?
Yeah, I think So on all of those side streets right now, we have stop signs. On most of them, like this picture in the lower right's what it looks like now. Stop signs on both sides of the road with cross traffic does not stop plaques. That's generally what they all look like. At this point, I just would expect a driver to know how to drive if they have a driver's license. I think if we were to put flags on there, we had flags before, they would be stolen. That's where that first month we make a change, we're going to throw that, we're going to do as much as we can. But a year and a half later, they stop. It's not that they're not stopping, it's that then they're just not yielding to traffic that they're responsible to yield for.
Could there be some other change to the intersection? I mean, the intersections also involve some raised intervals, like I know that the pedestrians are slightly raised. Could they perhaps be raised a little higher?
They could. I think that the challenge here it's that drivers are stopping. So a lot of the things that we have would be to help drivers know they need to stop. And that we have signs that tell them the cross traffic does not stop, but they, for some reason, are not realizing that or just making poor decisions. And then also just being out on the corridors, I'm sure many of you have, sometimes drivers also just get confused. Sometimes we see drivers stop when they're not required to. Just attention is an issue.
Finally, I'll ask about painting the pavement. Bike lanes have been painted green. Could we not paint the whole intersection green to say, hey, things are different here?
I think green is...
or some appropriate color.
I don't know what that appropriate color would be. So green is a tool we use for high conflict bicycle crossings. And that is green where those exist on the corridor across all driveways and intersections and alleys. Painting the entire intersection, that's not where bikes are necessarily going to be. So where they're generally going to be is already painted. So I'm not...
Again, the idea being that when in street design, there's often a combination of paint markings, stripings, and the like that collectively tell a driver, this is not what I'm normally used to. This is a special condition. The existence of the 7 line itself is a special condition. But perhaps we could mark it more vividly to emphasize the point rather than forcing stop signs.
I think that's where, and maybe I'll disagree or push back a little bit, just that I'm not at a point where I feel that the 7 line or the protected bike lane has contributed to the crashes we're reporting. So like what we're seeing, and it's still very early, is that at 7th and Dunn, since it's been reinstalled, the crash trend appears to be what it was before there was a protected bike lane. And I didn't share it, but 7th in Indiana has always been an always stop, and we added the protected bike lane, and we're seeing very similar crash trends post-project.
Thank you. I appreciate the extended questions.
Additional questions? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Seabour. So the initial recommendation from engineering, as has been said, was to reinstate stop signs at Lincoln, Washington, I think Morton, and Dunn. Is that right?
And Grant.
And Grant, so of all intersections. So what, so I know the Traffic Commission and the Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Commission both were opposed to that and wanted only the stop sign at Dunn to be reinstated. Is that why this proposal is only for Dunn Street, or has the opinion of engineering staff also shifted?
That's an excellent question. I think, this is a really complicated, difficult issue, and that's ultimately why I'm glad City Council has to consider it. I think it's very much reflecting and wanting to respect the opinions of our Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Commission and our Traffic Commission. It's trying to be mindful of the reason the stop signs were moved in the first place, to help encourage and facilitate an east-west corridor. But there are also merits based on a lot of the crash data specifically to consider always stops at those intersections as well. I could share more information on that too, but it's ultimately, I think right now, taking that iterative approach of tackling what is the highest problem intersection at 7th and Dunn. It doesn't ever preclude us from doing something again in the future, and just seeing how things continue to change over time.
Has the engineering department, or to your knowledge, any city staff received complaints similar to what Councilmember Rallo was referring to from constituents who have difficulty crossing 7th?
I have certainly heard some concerns from the public about after the project's been completed. And depending on the timing, when the first project was under construction, we had a significant uptick in crashes at Grant Street, more in that construction window of what we were looking at. I think there was one weekend there were 3 crashes there, so the residents noticed. Since we've more stabilized, I think we regularly get concerns, especially at Morton Street, about concerns there, and frequently see confusion, and maybe because of the proximity to where I work, but certainly have heard probably most concern at that intersection specifically. I know I have also heard some concerns from members of our Council for Community Accessibility that have just expressed some desire for making it easier for them to cross the street as well.
At Morton or in general?
Generally from that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions on Amendment 1, Councilmember Sims?
Thank you. We've talked about the importance of data, and I know we need more time to do some of these things. And traffic counts and crashes, and some of those are kind of easy. Is there any way that we can count somehow along the 7 line pedestrian comfort levels and crossing? Is there any way that we can kind of have data for not the actual crashes, but the near misses? And I guess well, I'll stop right there and see what you say to that.
Yeah, it's, oftentimes engineering will just generally receive concerns anywhere across the city about near misses. And one of the challenges, what is a near miss? And everybody has a different answer to that.
I ask you first.
And so I think I guess the honest answer is I don't know how we would do that to assess qualitatively people's opinions. Maybe there is some way to do a survey, but that's beyond my expertise.
Okay, and I bring those up. Thank you for that. But I bring those up because, first of all, I've heard many complaints about the 7 line. There's some folks that like it, but many complaints. To be clear, I will say that many of those complaints are from people that are my neighbors. We don't live downtown, we live in District 1. There's people from all over town. I care about and have heard complaints about things on Morningside, for an example, but I don't live there. Okay, so and maybe it's partly because I'm an at-large candidate and I can think broader than that. But the best part, or what I see as an advantage of this amendment, is add safety to pedestrians, in particularly going north-south crossings. I use that corridor at least weekly, and I live on the west side. I go up 7th Street to IMU, do my business, and then we come back the same way weekly. And what I have observed, and there are some good parts of it, don't get me wrong, but what I've observed is pedestrians that are hesitant, trying to sometimes cross in mid-block, walking through the protected bike lane to see if I can time, these things. And I've also often thought that if there was stop signs, you know what I'm saying? And I also think that would slow traffic. But if there's stop signs, then pedestrians, I beg your pardon? I think I'll get to that.
Okay.
Is that okay?
I wasn't sure. Okay.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead. Pedestrians crossing.
Is it the opinion of staff and yourself that stop signs will aid the safety and confidence of pedestrians to cross these streets? And sorry it took me so long to get to that, but I thought it was important to share what the thoughts were.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. I know I'll probably even catch myself sometimes using the term safety, and I probably shouldn't use that term because that's another, what is safe, and I like metrics and that sort of thing as well. I think anecdotally, I know I've heard people that as pedestrians may not cross at certain intersections at a time if there is a lot of traffic and will just wait till the next corridor or wait till there's gaps. So I think adding stop signs may make it more comfortable for some pedestrians to cross at those locations.
Thank you. I'm sorry it took me a while to get to that question. Thank you.
Additional questions? Councilmember Volin.
I'm thinking of two intersections, one in District 6 and one just outside it, the corner of 3rd and Grant and the corner of Walnut and Allen. These are both intersections that have been, the city has created bicycle, I don't know what you call them, they're safe ways for bikes to pass. They're also safe for pedestrians to pass. There's an island in the center where people can wait. Why don't we put stop signs on 3rd Street at Grant? Why don't we put stop signs on Walnut at Allen to make more pedestrians and bicyclists feel safe to cross?
That's a fair question. I might, and again, I'm representing an ordinance to focus on the one intersection.
Of course.
But that's a fair question. I think I'm going to try to share my screen and pull up another. I think my first answer to that would be that at those intersections, an always stop is not warranted. Where at some of these intersections, there are MUTC, manual and uniform traffic control devices. That's what we use. That's the Bible of traffic engineering. That's what state code says we should use. And it provides a series of metrics that we can objectively evaluate to see if a always stop should be considered. One of those, and this is maybe not clearly labeled, but it says greater than or equal to 5 crashes that are susceptible to correction in a 12-month period.
I can't see the done number because the closed captioning is
So
blocking
that's
it.
12. It says
12,
yes in
okay.
12 crashes in a 12-month period.
Okay.
So those are crashes that could be mitigated if an always stop was installed, and there's 3 locations that meet that criteria. And Dunn Street also meets the volume criteria. So that would be my first answer, is those locations probably don't warrant it or meet these criteria, where these 3 of them clearly do, and 2 of them could be debated.
Okay, so, but I mean, we don't just, the argument that somehow pedestrians would be able to cross more safely if we put a stop sign up is true literally anywhere.
That sounds like a discussion we had at another intersection in the city.
Right,
Correct.
so what we're really doing here is the sort of the cost-benefit analysis of where should stop signs go, where should, I mean, does the MUTCD offer, I mean, for the, let's say that I can see why you're proposing Dunn only. Washington and Lincoln seem to be of concern, but they're about half the rate of Dunn. Is there something else that the MUCD allows besides a full stop sign that might help mitigate these intersections? Just red flags up at those intersections. Are they still up there right now?
They are no longer there. Those were interim in those adjustment time windows. I think for the types of crashes that we're seeing, I can't think of a thing that would help drivers behave the way they're expected to behave.
But at the very least, you have noted that in the past 2 quarters or so, you've seen a drop-off to pre-pandemic numbers, to pre-7-line numbers.
Corridor-wide.
Is it safe to assume that if we were to wait another 2 to 4 quarters, we might see even more drop-off without any change? Is it too soon to tell?
I think it's too soon to say anything definitively, but what I would expect if no more changes are, we would probably keep steady at where we're at roughly 6 to 7 crashes a quarter as opposed to where we were at 10 after the project. I think there's potential that number would decrease if additional stop signs were installed at some of these locations.
I mean, I have no doubt that they would. It's more a matter of, can we expect that there might be a decrease here? I mean, these numbers are very low. They're small samples. If we were to wait another 2 to 4 quarters, we might see an increase on its own without the addition of stop signs.
Sure.
Maybe it's too soon to tell.
I think just for a little more context, because the numbers you're seeing here are crashes per quarter, and there's a lot of data here. But since the project was completed, so not just the 12-month window, but just overall, there's maybe a little more to it. So Washington had 5 crashes in a 12-month period, but we haven't had a crash there in probably 6 months, or since the always stop was installed at Dunn, for example, but it still meets that criteria. Whereas Lincoln Street does have 7 crashes in a 12-month period, but we've seen 9 crashes overall, so it does jump out a bit more. So it's, this is just one way of looking at things, and we can spin things a lot of ways, but.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Additional questions on Amendment 1, Councilmember Smith and Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Thank you. So I think for me, what I would just ask is, if we put the stop signs back that we're talking right now, it will generally make it a safer corridor. And I would ask you, is that a true statement or not?
I'll pull up another graphic.
And I appreciate your report. It's fantastic, so thank you.
Sure, no, good. Everybody's asking really good questions. So this is, again, total crashes per quarter, but I mentioned just it has a little bit more way of displaying the information. So the bar height is still the same as what it was, but the yellow bars are crashes related to always stop removal. So the dashed numbers you're seeing there are what I might expect to see if those crashes that could be mitigated by installing always stop, what we would see. So before Dunn Street, I was estimating maybe we'd have 4 crashes per quarter if all of them were installed back. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I would expect crashes to decrease if additional stop signs were installed somewhere probably in that 3 to 4 per quarter as opposed to the 6 we're at now.
Okay, so I'm going to take that as a kind of yes, that it would make the corridor safer to some extent, and it's still a little fuzzy exactly how much, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Director Seaboard, I am just, reading through your recommendation for this amendment, and I just wanted to ask if, I know some folks up here have talked about slowing speeds, and that is a concern for you, and you have spoken tonight, and of course, throughout the last year, that stop signs really don't slow speeds. So I saw that you noted that drivers feel comfortable driving in the 10-foot lanes. Would that be a recommendation to change the lanes, like paint them smaller, or like other recommendations to actually slow speeds so people feel more comfortable crossing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Honestly, I would hope that with 10-foot travel lanes and literally a curb is right at that edge of that curb, that would, probably if they were 11, we would see faster speeds. On this corridor specifically, I would not suggest going narrower just because it's also a high-frequency transit corridor and the buses already get through, but not with much room. If there were not buses like that, that could be a tool that could be considered. Did I answer your question?
Yes, it does. And just to follow up, in Indiana, we are not allowed to let the bike traffic go through these intersections without stops. Is that correct? Like if car traffic stops, the bikes also have to stop?
That's correct. Some states have different laws where a bicyclist could treat it like a yield sign, but in Indiana, it's required to treat it like a stop.
Okay. Do you foresee any issues? I mean, I guess it seems complicated if 2 cars and a bike come up, or even 3 cars and a bike come up to this space at the same time. I don't know, how does somebody actually know who gets to go?
Yeah. I think just culture is they generally take turns, and when you're stopped, you can make that eye contact and make that decision. But it may be confusing, but at least at that point, they're stopped and hopefully avoiding a crash, whereas if they're not stopped, that eye contact just doesn't always happen.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. I know we're struggling a little bit with the whole concept of safety, and I appreciated Councilmember Sims for bringing up, the comfort level of people on this street, and that might be a better benchmark, and it's hard to prove it with the data that we have. But could I just throw out there, would you be more comfortable with the word predictability? Because to me, I've been doing a lot of conversations with a lot of constituent groups about courtesy, common courtesy. And isn't it fair to say that a four-way stop, if it doesn't represent anything else, it does represent predictability? You kind of have a fighting chance to know that if you're any way insecure approaching an intersection, whether it's a busy one or an off-street, when there's that four-way stop there, you know they're going to stop. I have the opportunity to cross here without guessing. Is predictability a better word than maybe comfort level when it comes to why we would want to do this?
These are all such good questions. I don't know what the right word is. I think I would hope it is more predictable, or just drivers are stopped. But then getting back to there's still probably going to be that eye contact and sort of unofficial communication that happens between people, but at least they're stopped. So if it's predictability or comfort, I think all of those words have merit. I don't know what the right word is. Sure.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith, then Councilmember Volan.
I would like to offer an amendment to the amendment. And I apologize for the clunkiness of this. Mr. Seaborg, can you put the MUTCD guidelines grid back on the screen, please?
Yes.
So meanwhile, if we look at the amendment text, in Section 1, it says we would delete the following from Schedule A. Wait a minute. Basically, what I'd like to do is remove the part in the amendment that says we should reinstate the four-way stop at 7th and Morton Streets. If you look at the MUTCD guidelines, only Washington, Lincoln, and Dunn actually meet the guidelines for installing a stop sign. Morton Street does not. I know a lot of people try to cross at Morton, but half a block west is a stop sign at the Beeline Trail. And so there's a very safe and clear crossing for pedestrians very close to that intersection. And that intersection does not warrant a stop according to MUTCD guidelines. Mr. Lucas, can you perhaps help me out by putting on the screen the amendment that I'd like to offer to the amendment? Right, so we would just cross out Morton Street, I think, in both of the tables. Wait, in both the tables? Yes, in both of the tables. Thank you.
And also just some cleanup changes to update the number of intersections being affected.
Yes, 2 instead of 3.
And just to clarify, this would be Amendment A to Amendment 1.
So this would be an amendment to the amendment. Council is able to do that. You cannot amend an amendment to an amendment. So if this fails,
Thank heavens, right?
this is as far as we go down that rabbit hole.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas, and Mr. Seaborg, thank you.
So we have a motion for an amendment to the amendment. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Are there questions on amendment to the amendment? Councilmember Volin.
I mean, I don't agree with the sub-amendment because I don't agree with the amendment, but I'm going to ask the question I was going to ask because I think it's relevant. I mentioned Third and Grant earlier. This was a diverter that now prevents north-south traffic from proceeding through 3rd Street on Grant. Car traffic has to turn. Why would that not be a better solution for Lincoln Street than, or Morton Street, anywhere? Why shouldn't we put those diverters through, and make car traffic turn to head south or north, depending which way the road goes? Let me put it this way, would that not reduce traffic accidents even more than stop signs would?
Let me think. So Lincoln is, I got to get my bearings. That's southbound. So if there's a diverter, vehicles on 7th Street would still turn across the protected bike lane, but vehicles that are stopping on, I guess they would just be able to turn right to go onto 7th Street, or turn, they wouldn't even be able to turn onto, so
That's the case on 3rd now. You can only turn one way, depending which way you're going.
So I think that one of just, from a project development perspective, one of the challenges would be is space. We would have to somehow find the space to create another median to limit that, but that could be an option. It would affect traffic patterns and have, especially as we think about what might be happening on other corridors in the area, and how traffic patterns will be affected. But that could be an option, but would be a pretty significant, probably capital project.
Okay, I'm going to withdraw further questions because I know that Councilmember Piedmont Smith's sub-amendment only refers to one block, but I think that we're looking for solutions at all 4 of the blocks, not just the one, but I appreciate the answer, and I'll come back to it later. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions on sub-amendment 1? Okay. Seeing none, let us go to public comment then on sub-amendment 1 to amendment 1 to ordinance 2323. If there's anyone here in chambers who would like to offer comment, please approach the podium. Mr. Lucas, can you extend our invitation on Zoom, please?
Yes, if any members of the public wish to speak, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom to let us know. You can find that raise hand button in your control bar under the reactions tab or the more tab. You can also send a chat to the host to let us know you'd like to comment.
Thank you. And just to clarify, this is only on the amendment to the amendment. This is on removing Morton Street from the proposed amendment. So with that, let's come here in chambers. Welcome. If you would share your name, please, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Brianna Wright, and I am the other co-director of City Relations for Indiana University Student Government. We are in support of Ordinance 2323's sub-amendment, making a 3-way stop at the intersection of 7th Street and Dunn Street. That's the correct thing that we're talking about, right? Okay. This intersection is very close to campus, being a block away from Dunn Meadow and a few blocks away from the Indiana Memorial Union, which students traverse frequently. We believe, based on the evidence provided, this action will increase pedestrian, bike, and scooter safety, as well as driver safety. By having a 3-way stop, students can make it to class and other academic activities easier, and IU Student Government is in support of this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, we were talking about the removal of Morton Street from the amendment. Did you have a comment on specifically on that, or because it sounds like your comment was on the whole ordinance?
No, we do not have a comment on that.
Thank you. Mr. Lucas, do we have anyone on Zoom?
No, not this.
Okay, and is there anyone else here in chambers? Welcome. If you would, please share your name for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Paulie Terracone. I'll be swift because I have longer comment for the main amendment. And I appreciate the effort for the compromise, but I do think the original ordinance as it's on its own was the appropriate compromise. I think even the sub-amendment doesn't go far enough to actually address safety concerns while maintaining the original intent of the 7 line itself. I think it is inappropriate to be removing only Morton. I think it should include the other intersections as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here in chambers? Or anyone else on Zoom? Okay. Seeing none, let's come back to council for additional questions on the amendment to the amendment. Councilmember Sand.
No question.
Oh,
Comment.
Councilmember Rallo, question or comment?
Comment.
Question? Question, please go ahead.
A question for Mr. Seaboard. The MUTCD talks about warrants. How are warrants defined temporally? In other words, if after a certain period of time there's this many, then you must take action? Or, I mean, warrants, I guess, are if you want to, it's warranted, or if you want to, it's not warranted. But I mean, it seems that your data pointed out that after the initial construction, there's been a pretty consistent decline, with the possible exception of Lincoln Street, in accidents involving cars since the project was completed. So what are the conditions under which the MUTCD dictates? I mean, it doesn't really dictate. So, I mean, how do you make that? Why now?
Yeah, I think, I guess maybe a couple clarifications, and it's maybe terminology, and it's me being a technical person. But so warrants are something that exists in the MUTCD in relation to traffic signals. At stop-controlled intersections, I will probably use the term warrant, but technically they're more guidelines. So they're more like a guideline. It is not, if this is met, you shall do this. It's, if this is met, you should consider this. So that's maybe the way to look at it. These are, the ones on that table I was sharing were like primary considerations, but they also have other considerations that could be considered, like if it is a high-use pedestrian corridor, if there are line-of-sight related issues, things like that. But they're guidelines, they're not requirements. And then did you have another part that I
think you've answered my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions on the amendment to the amendment? Okay. Comments on the amendment to the amendment then. Councilmember Rallo, then Sandberg.
Yes, I don't support the amendment to the amendment. 3 principal reasons. One is, of course, we know that the police station is going to be housed in Showers. And I believe that a stop sign at Morton stopping traffic on 7th would aid police as they exit in that direction. Number 2, the farmers market, as I mentioned in other events, it's not simply limited to traffic, pedestrian traffic on the B line. Significant numbers of people cross at Morton Street. And then my third reason is I was among other people who have approached me about this amendment and sponsoring it was a judge who asked that Morton be a priority because of court personnel that needed to cross at that intersection. And I tend to agree with that. So I'm afraid I won't support this amendment to the amendment for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comment? Councilmember Sandberg?
Yes. Adding on to what Councilmember Rallo has said about his contact with people, I've had a number of people from the Justice Building, both personnel and officials, who have concerns about that Morton Street and the 7 line in general. So in my experiences talking to a number of constituent groups on both ends of this corridor, the IU end and then the downtown end, I have heard from more than 10 individuals with concerns about, the predictability and the comfort level of that particular intersection at Morton. So I will not be able to support this amendment, and I will wholeheartedly support the amendment as not amended. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comment? Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, it's a very busy intersection that myself going to the farmer's market, driving there and walking there, it is fraught with confusion right at that point. So I can't support it, and I hope we keep that there because it seems a little bit of a danger spot because of all the things go on, especially on the weekends. So I won't be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Volin.
I note that none of my colleagues who oppose the sub-amendment mentioned bicycling. I wonder if any of them have bicycled the 7 line. Councilmember Smith said he driving and walking there in that order. There are exactly 2, maybe 3 protected bike lanes in the entire city of Bloomington, and we're looking to, with the amendment that's being sub-amended here, the sponsor is looking to go back to business as usual, prioritizing cars. I find it to be very insufficient. First of all, Mr. Seaborg even said they're not even warrants, they're guidelines. And we haven't seen, after not enough time, we're seeing significant decrease back to pre-pandemic, pre-7 line levels. And we don't know that it might not get better on its own. We have more time. But Morton Street in particular, like who is saying it's less safe? Are they walkers or drivers? Eventually everybody gets out of their car and they walk, but they're getting their on their car. If they're saying that they feel that it's unsafe, maybe it's because it's unsafe to drive the way that they were used to driving, and they haven't gotten used to changing with the new traffic pattern. But by the logic of the amendment, we should put stop signs everywhere, at every intersection. It would be safer. We should put diverters in at every section because it would be safer. We're not just here because it's about the safety of the intersection. And they're not, again, not even warrants, these are guidelines. And we see that accidents at Morton Street are the lowest of any block on this corridor in question. So are we going to go with data or are we going to go with anecdote? I find that we have made too many decisions by anecdote. I support this sub-amendment only because I don't support the amendment, and that if the sub-amendment passes, at least the amendment will be that much less problematic. But I don't support the amendment at all, so I don't know how I'm going to vote on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, as Mr. Terracone said, I am offering this amendment to the amendment in an effort to compromise. I also agree with my colleague, Councilmember Volin, that this 7 line was an effort to not do business as usual, which is prioritizing automobile traffic. The point was to get more people bicycling and walking, but mainly bicycling with a protected bike lane, for which we have actually won awards for the 7 line the way it is now with very limited stops. So I do not want to negate the whole purpose of the 7 line, which was to have a comfortable, safe, smooth bicycle path from the Beeline Trail to campus and beyond. So this was my effort to at least, okay, if we're going to go by MUTCD guidelines, then at least we can take out Morton Street, take that out of the amendment. So I will be voting, obviously, for my amendment to the amendment. I am not in favor of the amendment as proposed. I hope that's clear. Sorry to muck things up, but I'm trying to salvage the best outcome here. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Councilmember Sandberg.
Well, first of all, I would like to challenge the assumption that those of us who want more predictability and more safety, as it were, for everyone along this corridor, that also includes bicyclists. There is no one taking away the infrastructure that makes that a protected bike lane. That is going to stay. That is the intent of making that corridor a good connector between those who ride bikes from the campus to the downtown and vice versa. So that's not an argument for me. And in my many conversations with many people in this community who are unhappy with the discomfort that they now experience on this new designed roadway, I hear from many bicyclists that would maybe welcome the fact that a stop sign would make it more predictable and safe for them. Now, the inconvenience factor of not, being able to just go straight through without stopping at all, that's certainly a trade-off. But as my colleague, Councilmember Scambolari, has always said, there are trade-offs with any decision we make. And I just would challenge anyone who's trying to make this yet again another battle between the cars and the bikes. That's not what this is. This is about making this roadway safe for everyone. Safer than it certainly is now, more comfortable than it is now, more predictable than it is now. And so once again, I'm not going to accept the argument that just because I myself do not ride a bike, I'm not entitled to weigh in and make decisions that would make this more compatible for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rallo.
Yeah, just to follow up, since my intentions were invoked, I thought I would respond to that. Have I ridden the 7-line? Yes, I have. I did ride to council exclusively by bike for about 5 years, 12 months a year, maybe with an exception of a half a dozen times I didn't do it, partly as a challenge between Councilmember Ruff and I, but partly because I wanted to find out, mostly because I wanted to find out what it was like to ride through town and by various routes, and to find out the relative safety and what would be a safe route and so forth. So I support biking infrastructure, and as my colleague, Councilmember Sandberg, said, the transportation infrastructure doesn't just serve cars or bicycles and scooters, but also pedestrians. And so I'm bringing this forward principally because I would like safe crossing for pedestrians, particularly pedestrians who have certain demographics. I think it disadvantages the older population, people with disabilities, to not provide a safe crossing that's provided by stop signs. So that's why I'm bringing this forward. Yes, it inconveniences bicyclists, perhaps, but ultimately, it is a matter of trade-offs. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Councilmember Volin.
I hear from this, I hear from that, I hear anecdotes being thrown around. I don't see data. The data that I have seen, it was a judgment call. Councilman Barallo is proposing something that is, at best, a judgment call. It certainly undermines the value proposition of a project that has, in fact, won awards. We are a national example with the 7-line the way it is. I think everyone agrees on 7th and Dunn. I don't think everyone agrees on putting stop signs every way. But if we want to do what Councilmember Sandberg says, we have an easy remedy. We've been doing it for several years. Bollards. We'll put bollards up and we'll close off the cross streets at Lincoln, Washington, Grant, in the same way that we closed off Kirkwood for the sake of putting restaurants outside. How many merchants, how many drivers were greatly inconvenienced by the bollards putting up, by their paths being cut off? It made it much safer for pedestrians. We could make the 7-line extremely safe for pedestrians by preventing cars from crossing at all. We have examples of this all over town. Protected pedestrian crossings if the bollards aren't good enough. Okay? So it's not just about safety, it's also about convenience. Those bollards would make it less convenient for car drivers to cross 7th Street, but it would make things safer. I just find it inexplicable that we're still debating the merit of this kind of transportation change. I mean, the upshot of these changes would be to to ruin the 7 line, simply put. I disagree with it, and again, I'm probably only going to vote for the sub-amendment because it will mitigate the impact of this amendment, which I heartily disagree with. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Okay. Deputy Clerk Crossley, will you please call the roll on the sub-amendment to Amendment 1?
Councilmember Scambolery,
No.
Rollo,
No.
Sandberg,
No.
Smith,
No.
Volan,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Sims,
No.
and Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
And I did not hear Councilmember Rosenbarger's vote.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. That fails 4-5, which brings us back to Amendment 1 to Resolution 20, or to Ordinance 2323. And is there, so it's not changed, so we are going to additional questions or comments from council, right? Am I in the?
Don't believe we've gone to public comment on this amendment.
Okay.
So
Okay, so are there a question on Amendment 1? Okay, please go ahead, Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Thank you, Director Seaboard. I just wanted to clarify, do you recommend this amendment? Does the administration recommend this amendment?
The administration brought forward an ordinance that we are advocating for.
Okay, so I mean, just out loud, I will say you do not recommend this. This amendment is not recommended. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions on Amendment 1? Okay, seeing none, let's go to the public for comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
Madam Chair.
That's twice I've done that. Sorry, Councilmember Flaherty, please go ahead.
Thanks. I maybe have a couple. Just first, wanted to confirm that I know we have a not a full year's pool of data since the Dunn Street change that we implemented earlier this year, but since that time, we have both a crash level that is back to pre-project levels on the corridor as a whole, and pedestrian, bicycle, and scooter crashes that are actually lower than pre-project as a whole at this time. Is that right, Mr. Seaboard?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. I'm thinking about this in the context of other intersections as well, and because as noted in your prior reports and in conversation tonight, there is in fact a goal of a priority corridor of allowing more efficient travel. So I'm thinking of like nearby intersections, like 6th and Washington, for instance, has a stop for 6th Street, but not for Washington. What's different about that intersection than what's being proposed here? Or if we advocate for stops, or if the council thinks that stop signs should be placed at 7th and Washington, 7th and Lincoln, 7th and Grant, why not also at 6th and Washington, and at 8th and Washington, and 8th and Lincoln, and 8th and Grant, where there are not always stops now?
Yeah, I guess I'm probably not in a position to really answer that specifically right now, but I think generally there are some intersections in what I'll call that downtown core that maybe we sometimes think are all always stop, but they're not all always stops. So I'm probably not really answering your question, but I don't know if I'm able to right now.
I guess let me think of another way to put this. Dunn Street, between 10th and 7th, I believe, has no stop signs at 8th and 9th. Is that right? So Dunn Street does not stop between 10th and 7th for car traffic, whereas if you're trying to cross on 8th or 9th as a pedestrian, it's not an always stop. Is that right?
I'm slowly trying to confirm because I don't have all my intersections memorized, but you may be right.
Okay, I confirmed via Google Maps a bit ago, so I'm pretty certain that's true. And you would agree that there's a lot of pedestrian crossing happening, right, from the downtown sort of core Old Northeast neighborhood, east and west across Dunn Street on 8th and 9th.
Yes.
And so the choice not to have all-way stops there, which at some level it is really to prioritize movement of cars from or anybody traveling in the roadway on Dunn Street between 10th and 7th, cars, bicycles, scooters. That's the basis of that decision, essentially. Not having all-way stops for all of those intersections is in order to give smoother flow of vehicle traffic in the roadway between 10th and 7th. Am I inferring correctly there?
I think that's probably a fair inferment. I don't know what the word. Yeah, it's a balance of oftentimes of safety and mobility and access. Those are all different things that we want all of. But yeah, I think you're right.
Okay. Thanks for helping me to draw that out. It seems very similar to me, I guess, in terms of sort of a series of intersections, some of which a stop sign makes sense at, some of which we've chosen a stop sign doesn't. Always stop does not make sense at for the purpose of facilitating efficient flow of traffic, which is also one of our goals. Sorry, that part's not a question, but it's a thank you for talking through that with me.
Additional questions? Okay. Seeing none, we are at public comment on Amendment 1. Okay. Here in chambers, if you have an interest in commenting on Amendment 1, please approach the podium. Thank you for doing that. Mr. Lucas, can you please extend our invitation on Zoom for comments on Amendment 1 to Ordinance 2323?
Yes, if there are members of the public that wish to speak to this amendment, please raise your hand in Zoom. You can find the raise hand button in your control bar under the Reactions tab or the More tab. You can also send a chat to the host to let us know you'd like to speak.
Thank you, and let's start here in chambers. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Good evening. My name is Paulie Terracone. While I found Ordinance 2323 agreeable prior to Amendment 1, I believe the amendment makes this legislation unacceptable. I'm a commissioner on the Bike and Pedestrian Safety Commission, and I hope it's not new information to any council members that our commission, in addition to the Traffic Commission, voted unanimously against the reinstallation of always stops at the relevant intersections. Noticing that Dunn and 7th has had an exceptional increase in collisions, it was unanimously agreed that recommending an always stop only for that intersection was an agreeable compromise. The amendment to this ordinance filed at the 11th hour is not interested in such compromise. It is uninterested in the recommendations of multiple commissions and of city staff. Critically, many of the predominant users of the 7-line are students and instructors who are all currently in the throes of midterms, many of whom won't have had sufficient opportunity to be notified that this legislation is being considered. This amendment is again uninterested in this vital segment of the population who will be directly affected by the outcome of this vote. This alteration to the street design wouldn't be so dangerous if it didn't require the stop of bicyclists. A fair compromise might be the Idaho stop, which has been discussed, where many states are seeing success with bicyclists treating stop signs as a yield rather than a complete stop. Unfortunately, we are bound by state law, which prohibits such legislation from being possible yet. Let me be clear. Bicyclists generally will not stop at these intersections, nor does it make sense for them to do so. Not only does it take significantly more energy for the bicyclist to regain momentum than a motorist who only needs to lightly press the accelerator, but even more importantly, the likelihood of collision between bicyclists and other vehicles increases as they spend more time in an intersection. Given this reality, the proposed amendment is all but certain to increase tensions, collisions, and unpredictability between bicyclists and motorists on 7th Street. This amendment is unconcerned with the need to promote cycling for our city to reach its climate goals. It is unconcerned with the fact our city saves money with each trip taken by bike rather than car. It is unconcerned with the profound benefits to public health that come with increased use of bicycling and of the increase of personal economic mobility that comes with decreased spending on vehicular travel. This amendment seeks through a thin veil to appease motorists who have expressed discontent with 7th Street, as they are now prompted to realistically share the right-of-way with bicyclists and micromobility users in a way they do not encounter throughout the vast majority of Bloomington. Even on that front, this amendment fails to improve the experience for any street users, regardless of their mode of travel, as it is entirely unrealistic and dangerous to expect bicyclists to consistently stop at these intersections. This is particularly critical in the event that a collision does occur between a bicyclist and a vehicle. Liability is far less likely to be on their side. At the very least, consideration for the recommendations of commissions and affected parties should be demonstrated, for which it is not. I urge the council to vote against this amendment for the sake of all street users of 7th Street. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any additional commenters here in chambers. Do we have anyone on Zoom?
Yes, on Zoom we have, I believe, Hopi Stossberg.
Okay. Welcome, Ms. Stossberg. Could you please confirm your name for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, this is Hopi Stossberg. As someone who was at the bike ped meeting where this was discussed, there were several cyclists who expressed concern at reintroducing stop signs on 7th Street, especially while going up the hill on 7th past Washington, Grant, and Lincoln. And that is one of the key reasons why the bike ped committee left those out of the recommendation. There was a great deal of discussion about it. The 7 line is designed to be bike friendly, and reintroducing those stop signs makes this route less bike friendly. Given that the crashes are reported to be generally caused by cars, and I believe mostly caused by cars trying to cross the 7 line, this reinstatement is penalizing bicycles more than the actual cause of those accidents. And as Mr. Cyborg's statistics, I believe, showed on one of those slides, there are actually fewer cars that are trying to cross the 7 line now. And I would anticipate that to continue, which would also help solve this problem in the long term, maybe better than adding in the stop signs. The stop sign reinstitution at Dunn does not cause the same kind of problem as the other ones east of Walnut, because Dunn is a flat part of 7th Street. And similarly, I honestly have no concern with reinstituting a stop sign at Morton for that same reason, because Morton is not in the middle of a hill. And I do agree anecdotally that that intersection does get, especially on farmers market days, really dicey with cars. Once again, it's cars trying to cross more than anybody on it. And so I just want to ask you to consider not voting for this amendment, or potentially adding a different amendment to the amendment that only includes Morton as an additional stop sign. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Stossberg. So, Mr. Lucas, do we have anyone else on Zoom?
Yes, next on Zoom is Ben Fulton.
I'm sorry, can you say that name again?
Ben Fulton.
Welcome. If you would, please confirm your name for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Hi, yeah, my name is Ben Fulton, and I would like you to not pass this amendment. And I don't have many additional comments that the previous 2 speakers haven't already made, except that it was discussed extensively by the Bike Ped Commission, and I listened into that meeting, and I refer you to the minutes of that meeting if you're interested in more information on what was all covered there. And I also listened to the Traffic Commission, which also rejected this set of stop signs. And I refer you to the minutes of that meeting if you're interested to know why that commission rejected these stop signs. So I would really ask that these stop signs not be added back in for all the reasons that all of the previous speakers have said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fulton. Mr. Lucas, do we have anyone else on Zoom?
No, not that I see.
And I'm not seeing anyone else here in chambers, correct? Okay. In which case, let's come back to council for additional questions or final comment on Amendment 1. Councilmember Volan.
I think that the utter lack of testimony from anyone other than council members for this amendment, and the testimony by those who are against this amendment, illustrate that those who would support it are out of step with Bloomington, out of step with the pedestrians and bicyclists who benefit from this. To say that restoring the stop signs is for the sake of pedestrians crossing is, I find, to be an unfortunate excuse for continuing to allow cars to cross. The example that Mr. Flaherty brought up of Dunn Street from 10th to 7th We can make this whole city safer for pedestrians by putting stop signs everywhere. Why aren't we? Why aren't we putting stop signs everywhere? Why aren't we putting stop signs on Dunn Street? Why aren't we putting diverters wherever we can? Because it would inconvenience car drivers. The fact that it also might be inconveniencing some pedestrians pales in comparison to the fact that pedestrians don't create accidents. They're usually the victims of accidents. You don't find data showing that pedestrians or bicyclists, the number of bicyclists who create accidents is less than 1% of the accidents created by car drivers. If we are really talking about safety, then we need to make cars stop, to take away some privilege from cars to cross streets. If we can do it on Kirkwood, we can do it on the 7 line. We can stop cars from crossing the 7 line. That's not what's being proposed here. We're proposing inconveniencing the one successful example of a protected bike lane in the city for the sake of not inconveniencing the people who some of my colleagues have heard from, but who didn't even bother to show up tonight. Please oppose this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate Councilmember Rowland's comments. I wouldn't go so far as to say that we can draw any conclusions from, who shows up and doesn't at a meeting necessarily, and who's able to weigh in. There are all sorts of barriers to doing so, and I certainly believe my colleagues who support this amendment in the who they've heard from and what they think about it. I respect that opinion. I think it's fine. I'm a little bit ambivalent in some ways. I think there are reasonable considerations here to balance. For me, there's a few things that are important to note. One is that pedestrian crashes are down now as compared to before the project. Like its current conditions are safer than before the project. Second is that overall crash rate, including cars along the entire corridor, is equivalent to pre-project levels. That is also what we were aiming to get back to and have achieved, in fact, with the Dunn Street stop sign readdition. A small caveat to both of those facts is that it's 2 quarters of data. Mr. Seaborn noted that we would benefit from more time, frankly, and more data to get to at least 12 months and see if the trends of the last 6 months hold true, and if we have in fact achieved the reduction in pedestrian crashes and the roughly equivalent to pre-project levels with all crashes that we're seeing right now. So I think that actually supports voting against the amendment and giving it more time, as staff recommended. I think we haven't talked a lot about it, but I do think the extensive discussions and unanimous opposition to this from both the Bike Ped Safety Commission and the Traffic Commission are important. I don't think any advisory commission of the city is ultimately if the decision's coming to us, it's ours to make. So let's be clear about that. It's not, we aren't required or necessarily even expected to always follow what an advisory commission says, but I take the time and expertise and, attention with which those commissions treated this problem very seriously. And so it creates, in my mind, some level of presumption, essentially, that we have a responsibility to overcome as to why we shouldn't side with the 2 duly appointed advisory commissions that you voted unanimously against, what is functionally this amendment. And so if there's a presumption that we should side with the commissions, what have we done to overcome that? I haven't heard anything really. I've heard some anecdotes and some constituents who feel one thing, but we have constituents who feel the other thing too. And the data, again, to return to the data, it does not support the amendment. And then finally, if the commissions themselves, staff didn't have to agree with the commissions either. And in fact, initially they didn't, but Mr. Seaborn ultimately decided to move forward his department with a 180-day order on Dunn Street only. And now that's what they have brought to us for implementation. He's agreed that we would benefit from more time to look at data forward-looking and think more carefully about any changes beyond what's proposed in the ordinances originally drafted tonight. And so ultimately, that's there's a lot of opinions and different ways folks feel about stuff when it comes to safety in our ecosystem, in our transportation ecosystem, based on our own experiences. And so I think we do have to, at some level, really defer to staff expertise and data. And in both instances here, that I would say urges against passing this amendment. And getting staff on board, I think, is important, as we've seen with some other initiatives that we've worked with staff on to reach alignment on before bringing to the council. So for that reason, ultimately, I'm not going to support the amendment, but I would certainly support the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments, Councilmember Sandberg.
I appreciate Councilmember Flaherty's reminder to all of us that our boards and commissions, as important as they are advisory in nature. And I remind myself, as a longstanding member of this council, that I have one job to do, and that is to represent the entirety of the city as an at-large member. And I must also take some offense to the insinuation that all I'm going by is anecdote. Just little comments here and little comments there, because I do take the time to reach out to people who aren't in this chamber, people who wouldn't be caught dead in this chamber, people who are concerned residents of the city who talk to one another, who certainly reach out to me in many ways. And to just reduce this to some gaslighting, just because there weren't people in the chambers expressing their support for this amendment, they don't exist. They do. I can assure you they do. I was having conversations with about 30 just today. I had breakfast with 7 on Tuesday who were very much in support of this because of their lived experiences on these streets, because of their discomfort with it, and in no way do I discount those individuals. I'm an elected representative. That means I have an obligation to take in all the information. Data is important. Yes, it is. But so are the feelings of the people who put you in office, the people who are expecting you to fight for them, and maybe it's an uphill fight sometimes. But these are individuals who do talk to us. They reach out to us in many forms, whether it's constituent meetings or just our day-to-day contact with people. And that includes even people who ride bicycles who have approached me and said, things could be better on the 7 line. So once again, I need to remind everyone that I'm doing my due diligence as an elected official to speak up for people who have taken the time to speak to me, and it's not an insignificant number of people. Over the years, over time, since the onset of many of these boards and commissions that have taken on maybe more important roles here, and members of the public have not always been treated very nicely by some of these unelected bodies. And maybe that's why a lot of them are not wanting to come into chambers or even join us on Zoom for fear of being ridiculed, for fear of being told that their opinions don't matter. I've seen a lot of negativity, and all I'm trying to do with this particular vote is restore some common courtesy. We can all take our turns at a 4-way stop. There is no harm in that. No harm, no foul. We are not destroying the 7 line. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments on Amendment 01? Councilmember Rallo. Oh, I'm sorry, and then Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Okay, yes, the reason I'm bringing this forward is not for car advocacy, it's for pedestrian advocacy, so that's a mischaracterization. Transportation infrastructure, as we've mentioned, should serve cars, bicycles, scooters, and pedestrians. My experience has been, and I know this is anecdotal, but I think I can bring some evidence to bear, has been heavily discounting pedestrians. And I know some pedestrians are fit enough to cross a crosswalk without a stop sign fairly quickly. But older demographics can't, and people with disabilities can't. And they deserve safe crossing as well. the proposal between, of putting stop signs at Lincoln and Washington, let me step back a bit. As this corridor exists now between Walnut and Dunn Street, it's 1,500 feet without a stop sign. No place where a pedestrian can safely cross, 1,500 feet. This restores some pedestrian crosswalks where they can safely cross at a stop sign. If you don't think it's important to have a stop sign for pedestrians, well, gosh, I don't know what to say. I think it is important. I think that by not putting a stop sign in at Grant Street, it essentially allows a bike unimpeded between Lincoln and Dunn Street, which is a little bit less than half the distance of 1,500 feet. So you still have some area unimpeded. I think Morton deserves special consideration because of the reasons I mentioned about the heavily trafficked area for pedestrians, because of the market, because of court personnel. And I thought to aid police in terms of, as Councilmember Sandberg said, providing order for that intersection. It was interesting during questions that I think it was Councilmember Sandberg who asked Director Seabour if putting in stop signs along that corridor would slow traffic. Well, it can't help but slow traffic because you have to come to a stop. And that means that pedestrians who are crossing are less likely to be injured, as we've seen this many times before. If you are hit at 30 miles an hour, you have a 55% chance of surviving. If you are hit at 20 miles per hour, you have a 95% chance of surviving. So it does matter, the speed. So this is about pedestrian advocacy. I think I support the biking corridor. I voted for it. We're not taking it away, but we are adding order at those intersections and an opportunity for pedestrians to cross. So I ask for your support, and thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rosenberger?
Thank you. My comments aren't in any kind of good order today. So here we go. Data also show that unnecessary stop signs leads to fewer people stopping and failing to obey traffic rules. So I think something that really scares me about this is that if a bicyclist or a pedestrian is trying to cross the road and expecting that someone is going to stop and that person doesn't stop, that means most likely that that person walking or biking is killed by a person driving a car. And we haven't talked about that tonight, but we have talked about it in other meetings, and I think it's terrifying. This has been brought up already. We don't have enough data to make major alterations, but what we know so far is we have increased pedestrians, increased bikes, and fewer bike, ped, scooter crashes on this corridor. I would just first like to say thank you so much to the engineering department and the planning and transportation department, because that is wildly awesome, in my opinion, for this space. To increase users and decrease crashes, that's astounding, and I think that is why we have national attention on this. What Councilmember Flaherty implied, I think is accurate here, and I can't see a reason why we wouldn't do what some of these council members are implying, stop signs at every city intersection. So I am the council member right now for Olive, Rogers, and Madison. So that is from Country Club Road, is the entire length of the city, all the way up to 17th Street. I have had people come to me at almost every street crossing that doesn't have a stop sign on Rogers or Madison asking if we can do something, because Rogers and Madison are streets that so many people bike and walk across, and so many drivers drive very fast up and down. And I have met with these folks with engineering, and we have looked at crash data, and it has just come up that we have such limited resources in this space, and other intersections need it more. So we cannot ignore the fact that when we put stop signs at places that don't warrant them, we are continuing to leave other much unsafer intersections in our city. I think what could also be more predictable and is very hard to figure out, but Director Seaborg kind of spoke to this, is how do we get drivers to follow traffic rules? When we have signs that say cross traffic does not stop and we have flags on stop signs, what do? How do we get people to stop driving distracted? Because I think when people started texting and driving, crash rates went up across the country. And that to me is a much bigger problem, and it's just wild to me that people are driving machines that can kill other road users, and they're still just blowing through stop signs. We might not have this data available also, but I'm kind of curious as to how many crashes in these spaces where we change traffic patterns are locals versus visitors, because I think visitors, just kind of predicting that visitors drive with more alertness because they're not used to the traffic patterns, and that it's hard for people to make changes to habit. So I don't know. I would just think people blow through stop signs when they're not used to it, or stop in places that don't have a stop sign anymore. Okay. Sometimes I really wonder about what to say about these things. You know, like, we had a primary election, and one council member who didn't get reelected recently said they think we've done enough for bike and ped. And I feel like the voters disagreed with that. And it's just, we're in a very weird space, and I've never been in this space before. Of course, this is my first time being elected and then reelected, but we're in this space where there's a new council coming in with, I guess, different priorities than the current council. And I mean, I can't help but say, I don't think we have enough data here, and I think this needs to be tabled until we do. And Director Seaborg said there's not really enough data, and we don't tend to look at crash data in quarters. We look at it in years. And I'm not saying we need to wait a lot of years, but like, it looks like it's on the right track, and it does take people some time to change their behavior, like reading traffic signs. But I think we should wait, because I don't feel like there is enough data here. And that can be it. It can wait for however long. Also, I feel like this amendment has been discussed for months, but for some reason it was just put into the packet 6 hours before our meeting. I don't feel like that gives residents or people who might want to comment any kind of notice to email us, to come in, to watch the meeting on Zoom. So I don't know why that happened. It just seems very odd to me. Just some comments on the comments that we've heard so far. If boards and commissions are indeed advisory in nature, I guess we can suppose, I'm not actually going to say that one, but I think residents are being treated badly, right? Like, someone saying we're not listening to our residents, but I think this is especially true for boards and commission members who are constantly being told by members of this council that their reports and their recommendations don't matter. Honestly, I have told people not to sign up for boards and commissions because I don't think this council takes them seriously or respects their time. I'm going to be voting no on this amendment, and I am going to continue. This is like a lot of talking just to say that what I have done for my term on council is voted with the engineering recommendations, and I'm going to continue to do that because I greatly appreciate the amount of studying and data that goes into a decision and a recommendation from them. And here we don't have enough data yet, so I want to keep it the way it is and wait.
That concludes your remarks, I take it. Additional comments? Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. I was content to just listen. There's many good points from my colleagues. I think we kind of got off the rails somewhere along the line, and I kind of have to say certain things. I don't know who my colleague was talking about. Just to be clear, I did not seek re-election, so therefore I was not re-elected, and I've never said that Bike and PED and all those commissions we've done too much for. Never said that. I live out west. We have the bike protected lane at least around the cemetery from Kirkwood going on down to 3rd Street. I want that for some of our people, but that's just the point. I think, again, we kind of got off the rails. When I heard about this, the amendment, And I talked with the sponsor a couple times. And right off the top, I said, you know, I'm trying to avoid contentiousness as much as possible. Let's seek some civility. So we talked about some things, and I'm like, you know, a bunch of folks tell me about Morton. So to start this conversation, maybe we do Morton and done. But then we talk more, and I see the value of what the amendment is trying to encapsulate here. You know, I'm like one of my colleagues. I was a little bit offended to say that, you know, many of us that oppose some things are out of step in Bloomington. Out of step, just because we have a difference of opinion. And if people aren't here, they're not unwilling to testify. Well, and my colleague, Councilmember Sandberg, said some things I think that was pretty clear and pretty direct. I do know that this council has a committee on processes and rules, and they're meeting, and they're going to come up with some things, and ways to run the council and all that. Maybe they can come up with something that will allow me and some of my colleagues to record these citizens or otherwise document their comments, and I will bring them to this meeting so that they won't be devalued because they don't come here or otherwise communicate except through us as their elected representatives. I mean, I just had to say that. I mean, I don't know why we went there. I've been in the minority on several divisions in my 2 terms on this council. That's part of it. But I sleep well because I feel like I'm representing the folks that have contacted me. To be fair, I've heard some folks that say, you need to leave the 7 line alone. I've heard those, you know. To be fair, I've heard those. But I've also seen other things. I've heard many, many more that thinks there's an issue that needs to be resolved. So I will leave you all with that. This comment, I will support this legislation. And I really hope that at some point I can document some things while I'm walking through Kmart, while I'm walking through the farmer's market, while I'm walking out through Woolery Mill, when I'm walking over here to get coffee at 7th and Morton. And maybe I can bring that here and it will be accepted by my colleagues and valued as opposed to people being accused of being unwilling to testify or to being out of touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Volan.
I would submit that my colleague, like all my colleagues, are in touch with constituents generally. But it's hard to document everyone's opinion because there's too many people to document. We live in too big a city. It's not a practical matter, let alone when an amendment comes on the day of the decision. But I mean, the only time when we can truly measure everyone's opinion is elections. So I don't know. I mean, I think the Councilmember Sims's hope is a vain one, not because it's not desirable, because it's just impracticable. It would be too hard to do it. We rely on people to come to us. But we also have to use our judgment, and in that respect, the problem I have with my esteemed colleague, Councilmember Sandberg, is she actually used the word, in no way does she discount the feelings of those who put her in office. From what I gathered from her speech, the feelings of people who contact her are more important than anything else. She's prioritizing the anecdotes of the people who are concerned. And while 10 or 30 people might be a significant number, which would help if we could have the discussion with them in the room, there are 80,000 people here. And I keep talking about my district, which is full of people who turn over less than every 4 years. They're not here. They're actually on the 7 line using it. And I just find this whole proposal, this amendment, to be inconsistent with the sort of thing that my colleagues have supported before, arbitrary and selective. It's playing to personal biases. It's not saying that any individual member of council, any member of the public, doesn't have valid opinions, but we're trying to to have a representative government. Majority rules. A majority is probably going to rule here. I'm expecting a majority is going to rule to put the stop signs back. I'm also expecting that come 2024, a majority is going to rule to undo it. So the majority can do what it wants here because it's bad policy. It's clear that it's reactionary. It's clear that the data support leaving the design as it is. And it's clear that my colleagues have not thought enough about putting stop signs in other places or stopping cars in other places. They're only focused on the 7 line. Why only on the 7 line? Why is it that bicyclists have to be punished for the one truly express method for bicyclists to get across town? Something I remember hearing 15 years ago when car drivers were complaining about how there's no good way to get from Kmart to Kmart across town east-west. When the roads were changed at 3rd, 5th, and Adams, or done at Atwater, Indiana, and Henderson to make it easier for cars to get across town. Here is the first path that's easier for bicyclists to get across town, and we're going to hobble it because of the reactionary opinions of people who are not sure that they like it very much, who can't be inconvenienced to drive slower or to be more careful or to have to wait an extra second to cross the street. I'm just so bitterly disappointed in my colleagues who I know are people of honor and integrity. I know they're trying to do what's best, and yet I'm faced with this kind of decision. And it's not the first time, it's over and over again. We should not let people's feelings be the final why bother to put together a transportation plan? Why bother to have a comprehensive plan if we're just going to shrug it off and ignore it? Why bother keeping track of the warrants? Let's just rule everything by anecdote. Well, if the people I talk to at the farmer's market feel like maybe it's not working, maybe I don't really care about the expertise of our chief engineer. What are his qualifications anyway? What does he know? Feelings, my feelings are what matter. I urge everyone to at least postpone this decision until we have more data, but I can't support it. I'm a no on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional final comment on Amendment 1. Councilmember Rollo.
Yeah, I think that this is getting into some kind of, I don't know, discussion about character or something. I mean, I respect everybody's opinion here, and I realize that we're advocating from sort of different perspectives. I happen to believe that pedestrians are underserved here, and they deserve a stop sign or two. But I just want to respond to Councilmember Voland because I have advocated for traffic calming elsewhere. I've advocated for traffic calming in the form of speed control. I've advocated for, actually very early before I was on the council, I advocated for a traffic light at Hawthorne and 3rd Street, which eventually happened after I saw Professor Zorn actually get hit by a car there. I advocated for a stoplight at Indiana and Atwater, which actually was implemented. I advocated for a stoplight at Olcott and I'm sorry, what road is that? Hillside. And that didn't happen, although there is a flashing light there. I supported a stop sign that Councilmember Piedmont Smith brought forward to get to Bryant Park. I just advocated for a stop sign actually at Sheridan and Mitchell. So this is not an exception. I do respect the principle of a protected bike lane. I bike myself. I don't think it's a big obstacle to implement a couple stop signs in order for pedestrians to also be able to be served by the city's infrastructure. There's a lot of pedestrian traffic from downtown, from Kirkwood, that proceeds north or comes south, and eventually, especially at events. So I hope to remedy that by putting these stop signs in. I realize that it is a matter of trade-offs, and I appreciate the discussion. Thanks.
Additional final comment on Amendment 1. If not, I'll finish up. Wow. Just wow. I very much agree with one of Councilmember Volan's points where he said that he believes everybody on this board, on this council is a person of honor and integrity and is trying to do the right thing. I would agree. We just differ in our opinions of what the best course forward is. I have listened to the viewpoints expressed by Bike and Ped. Bless you. I have listened to constituents, some of whom said we should do away with the 7-line entirely, and I happen to disagree with that. I also have a campus office at 7th and Park, and I spend a lot of time here, obviously, in City Hall near 7th and Morton, so I travel this either by car or on foot literally every day for one reason or another. So I have obviously an interest in and have been as attentive as I can be to the patterns I see. I don't accept the argument that the addition of stop signs is prioritizing car traffic and punishing bicyclists. I just don't accept that. We happen to live in a state where bicyclists are expected to stop at stop signs too. I don't see that as punishment, and we may disagree on that point. I'm struck very much by something Mr. Seabour said, that he talked about stop signs not being used as tools for traffic calming, but being appropriate to use for other purposes. And I think one of the purposes that we've talked about periodically in this conversation is some of the confusion and the uncertainty we see on everybody's part, bicyclists, pedestrians, motorists, along this 7-line trail. And I believe stop signs would reduce some of that confusion and uncertainty as we see it. So I will be supporting this amendment. And with that, Deputy Clerk Crossley, if you would, please call the roll on Amendment 1 to Ordinance 2323.
Councilmember Rallo,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Volan,
No.
Flaherty,
No.
Rosenbarger,
No.
Sims,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
No.
and Scamberlery.
Yes. Amendment 1 passes 5-4. That takes us back to Ordinance 2323 as amended. Let's go to public comment on Ordinance 2323 as amended. I'm not seeing any raised hands or movement here in chambers. Mr. Lucas, can you extend our invitation on Zoom, please?
Yes, if there are members of the public that wish to speak to this item, please let us know. You can raise your hand or send a chat to the meeting host. I see no takers on Zoom.
Okay, in which case, let's come back to council for final comment on Ordinance 2323 as amended.
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, question, Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, my question is, if this ordinance as amended fails, what happens to the intersection at Dunn 7th Street and the 180-day order? Is there a way to extend that order, or? Mr. Seabour, maybe you can speak to that.
I'll take a stab at what I think would happen, or what I would try if this ordinance failed. In the past, I can think of at least one instance where I have extended a 180-day order and essentially reissued it. I think that's a likely course of action that we would do to maintain that in place.
So legally, you can't extend it.
It's been done before, and I've consulted with legal before we've done that.
And then could an ordinance then come back to council and back through the process at some point in some form?
Yes, on the previous question, I've also looked into that question. I don't think our current code precludes the issuance of a new 180-day order. If another change to Title 15 was needed, that could be initiated by a number of ways, and the council could take that up, yes.
Thank you.
Any additional questions, or shall we go to final comment? Okay, final comment on 2323. Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Thank you. I was debating introducing my own amendment tonight, 6 hours after this previous amendment. I guess now we're at 9 hours after this other amendment went out, to also add stop signs under the same rationale, I guess, is why folks were for that one. So streets that have a pretty big crossing distance. So stop signs at 8th and Walnut, because that, I think, I was just looking on Google Maps, that is 48 feet. And then the 7th Street is 20 to 21 feet. So people with disabilities, people who are older, people who are younger would have a really hard time, do have a really hard time crossing there. And I'm pretty sure, I don't have the data on how fast traffic goes, but I think it's most likely faster than that 27 miles per hour. Another one I thought about adding as an amendment for an all-way stop would be 3rd Street and Grant Street. I think also people with disabilities, people who are older, people who are younger would have a hard time crossing there, because it is actually about 53 feet across. So I guess if we want to start adding stop signs to where people might have a hard time crossing, traffic goes too fast, and there isn't a stop sign, I think we have a lot to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments on 2323 as amended? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Volin.
I would take Councilmember Rosenbarger's idea one step further. Why not also at 9th and Walnut? The exact same problem there. Why, if the stop signs are good for a street that's half the width, here is a street that lots of people would like to cross. I think of Walnut and College as rivers. I noted with irony that when I used to live near the corner, the northeast corner of 6th and Walnut, that my abode was in the University Elementary School District, even though Fairview was far closer. Well, how that got drawn, I don't know. But one thing I know that people would say was that, crossing Walnut and College with little kids is dangerous. And so I guess we're going to drive them all the way to outside the city to send them to school. But why not stop signs on Walnut at 8th and 9th? The same arguments apply as they do here. And it's just as arbitrary. This ordinance was focused on the 7 line, but it's opening Title 15. There's no reason why we couldn't have added those stop signs, which are very proximate to this area and very relevant. So again, I'm very, very disappointed in my colleagues. I don't think they have gotten the message that the community has been trying to give them. Thank you.
Any additional final comments on 2323 as amended? Seeing none, Deputy Clerk Crossley, will you please call the roll on ordinance 2323 as amended?
Councilmember Sandberg,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Bolin,
No.
Rosenbarger,
No.
Flaherty,
No.
Sims,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
No.
Scambolery,
Yes.
and Rollo.
Yes.
That passes 5-4. Thank you. That takes us to ordinance 2322.
Move that ordinance 2322 be introduced and read by the deputy clerk by title and synopsis only.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the deputy clerk please call the roll on the motion to introduce?
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Volan,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Scambolery,
Yes.
Rollo,
Yes.
and Sandberg.
Yes.
That passes. Will the clerk please read?
Ordinance 2322 to vacate public parcels regarding two 12-foot wide alley segments located between West 1st Street, West 2nd Street, South Rogers Street, and South Walker Street. City of Bloomington Redevelopment Commission petitioner. The synopsis is as follows. The petitioner, City of Bloomington Redevelopment Commission, requests vacation of two segments of alley right-of-way that were previously used as a part of IU Health parking lot to facilitate the development of the Hopewell neighborhood. The east-west segment will be replaced by an alley slightly further south. The north-south alley will be partially replaced by a pedestrian easement.
Thank you.
Move that ordinance 2322 be adopted.
Thank you. And I believe we have Mr. Robinson with us this evening.
Good evening. Scott Robinson, Director of Planning and Transportation. Thanks for having me tonight. It's nice to take a deep breath. It's good to see your faces. I'm here tonight to bring forward a vacation request for two alleys as Deputy Clerk Crosley outlined in the synopsis. In your packet, there's detailed information included that does detail the two 12-foot alleys, one north-south, one east-west in the southwest corner of 2nd Street and Rogers Street. The Plan Commission did approve a primary plat back in July of this summer. That plat is consistent with the Unified Development Ordinance. It also sets us up for the redevelopment of a low-income housing tax credit project for the core building for affordable housing. Notification has been sent to utilities in our interest to vacate the alleys. We have not heard of any conflicts, but that does put them on notice if there were utilities located within these alleys that they would need to be relocated. Furthermore, we presented to the Board of Public Works on September 12th. The board provided a positive recommendation to vacate this right-of-way. I would also further add that it's consistent with the council's guidelines on Resolution 8702 to vacate parcels. With that, I certainly recommend that council support to vacate these alleys. I'm going to turn it over to Director Seabour for any additional comments that he may have on the request. Again, thank you for considering this ordinance tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Seabour?
Thanks again, Andrew Seabour, City Engineer. I'll try to be really quick, but just wanted to add a little additional context to what Director Robinson added. Thank you again just for your time and consideration, especially if this is the second right-of-way vacation request specifically for Hopewell. I'm hopeful that this presentation and the project really reflects the feedback and discussion that we've had in previous iterations. As a couple examples, the administration previously committed to working with City Council on establishing a new overlay district. That has, of course, been done. And then we've also committed to engaging and seeking input from this body as we move forward with future subdivisions, which I've tried to reached out to each of you on. Just really briefly, this is an image of the Hopewell area. I like looking at maps. This is an image from the city's purchase agreement with IU Health. Phase 1 East, I hope everybody's familiar, but if public is watching or not, Phase 1 East is the area between 2nd Street, Morton Street, 1st Street, and Rogers Street. That is an area that we discussed a vacation at previously. This is for the Hopewell West area. It's on the site where the former primary hospital facilities were located, and it's west of Rogers Street. And just for reference, there are additional parcels located south of 1st Street slated for redevelopment that are expected to help transition the development density into the adjacent neighborhood. The engineering department, planning and transportation, of course, regularly references the city's transportation plan when we're developing projects. It's worth noting that the Hopewell West plat proposes connectivity that's not contemplated in the transportation plan, so we're meeting and exceeding what's in the transportation plan. And as Director Robinson mentioned, this is consistent with the parameters of the UDO and the overlay district. And with that information, the Plan Commission, Board of Public Works both voted to support this proposal. And of course, this proposal was based on a foundation of the 2021 Bloomington Hospital Site Redevelopment Master Plan, which was developed with significant consultation with the community. So this is an image of the secondary plat and trying to use colors to capture what we're really talking about. North is up, 2nd Street's at the top of the screen. Rogers Street is on the far east or right-hand side of the screen. Ultimately, the question before you tonight is whether to vacate the alley right-of-way in the southwest corner of the Rogers and 2nd Street intersection. These alleys are seen as red on the map and represent approximately 0.16 acres of right-of-way. The vacation of these alleys is a condition of the Plan Commission's approval of the primary plat. If the right-of-way vacation is approved and the primary plat continues forward, this will result in the dedication of 3.77 acres of additional right-of-way. This is spread between widening existing road right-of-way, the creation of a new street grid within the former hospital site, and some additional alleys. It will also result in the dedication of approximately 1.06 acres of public park space adjacent to University Street, and finally includes the establishment of 0.12 acres of pedestrian easements to connect the alleys to the new park space. In total, the proposal creates nearly 5 acres of new public space if we are able to vacate the requested 0.16 acres of right-of-way. Ultimately, our request is approval of Ordinance 2322 to vacate a small amount of alley right-of-way to support the Hopewell redevelopment. This proposal has been developed, as we've both said already, consistent with various city plans and requirements. As a reminder, if this right-of-way vacation is rejected, another application cannot be initiated by state code for 2 years. Additionally, the approved primary plat is a critical component of the core redevelopment application. Definitely appreciate your time. Scott and I are, of course, here to answer questions, and also we have a representative from our engineering consultant firm if there are technical questions on the design. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Seaboard. Questions? Councilmember Volan.
Thanks for the presentation. I know that several of us were concerned about the vacation of alleys in the past because we were afraid of more monolithic buildings there. But the first question I'll ask is, can you put the map back up? Right there. So why is it that 1/6 of an acre, those alleys there, why do all the other right-of-way dedications depend on that minor amount of alleys being vacated?
It's a condition of the primary plat, I guess is the short answer.
I don't know what that means practically.
So we can't, the primary plat is what creates those new rights-of-way, and we cannot have that primary plat approved without the vacation because existing right-of-ways are in conflict with the proposal.
Why are those alleys in conflict with the rest of the proposal?
Because it goes through a proposed lot. I think it looks like lot 11. It goes through the park property or proposed park facility that's adjacent to University Street.
So you're talking about that small red mark there over the new establishment of University Street. There's a tiny little alley there. Doesn't go all the way through.
Yeah. There's a red that goes through the green, so essentially that would be a right-of-way in the middle of a park space. And additionally, you can see we have shifted the alley right-of-ways a bit just to create more even lots. And additionally, I just want to also mention the existing alleys are 12 feet wide, And really what we're trying to do is establish 20 feet wide alleys to better accommodate the traffic flow since they're the primary access points.
So the north-south red line is going through one of 5 lots that would face Second Street? Am I reading that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so it's not a single building, and they're not going to be sold in a way that will allow somebody to accrete them into a single lot. Is that correct?
I think the intent is for them to be developed as individual lots. Can they be combined by single things? That's potentially a possibility. I know the UDO and the overlay district does limit the building footprint size as well, so that is a limiting factor.
But don't we control this land, and we can write it into the deed that this land cannot be assembled with the neighboring lots to prevent that?
Yeah, the city's redevelopment commission will own this land.
So they could put that into the deed to prevent this from being, I mean, we're concerned, if I'm speaking for my colleagues who agreed with me at the time, we're concerned about a building as large as the parking garage right around the corner here that's an entire block long. Why haven't they put that into the deeds for those lots?
I guess currently the deeds are owned by IU Health still, so that's not a possibility for the city to consider.
So are you saying that IU Health is the one requiring the vacation of these lots?
If the redevelopment commission is requesting it, they will, per the purchase agreement, own it by the end of this calendar year. But they are not currently the owner.
That's it for now. I have more questions, but I'll wait.
Okay, Councilmember Rollo.
Mr. Seabour, so just so I'm understanding this correctly, so the vacation essentially consists of this cross, and the pedestrian easement is going to be maintained. Yes?
Yes.
And the lot 11, the extension north, is going to be vacated. And those 5 lots, could they be essentially, could a monolithic building essentially occupy that entire corner?
I will probably defer a bit to planning, but I believe there are building footprint maximums spelled out in the overlay that would preclude that possibility.
Would preclude it? Okay, and then the vacation that runs from Jackson Street to Rogers, does that occupy the entire alley, or is it just a vacation of part of that area?
So the vacation request would be the entire red segment, but we would be creating a new alley that sort of overlaps a bit with that existing
Okay,
footprint.
so there is the potential. Is that alley wide enough for, certainly for pedestrians and bicyclists and things like that? Okay, and vehicles or not?
Yeah, everything that's blue, I would expect to accommodate vehicles and be designed for vehicles.
Okay. And then that southern little segment that's vacated is essentially common area, park space, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks for going through that for me. I understand.
Additional round, or Mr. Robinson?
I just want to bring up a point of clarification on Councilmember Volan's question. Developers could buy multiple lots, but one of the things in the UDO, we do limit floor plates. And so that is one of the big things that would reduce the possibility that you get a large building. The reason why we have those floor plates is to help structure our affordable and sustainable housing incentives. So in order for you to get those larger foot plates, you need to be able to do that. There's certainly means to negotiate that with the RFI development, but again, those floor plate standards are set up to encourage smaller footprints of buildings on those lots.
Thank you. Additional round 1 questions? Seeing none, let's go to round 2. Councilmember Volan, you had additional questions?
Well, I mean, I'm still sort of mystified by the need, at the least, for the vacation of the north-south red alley, the one that goes between 2nd Street and the alley that's also being vacated. there's going to be, there's a proposal for the part from the middle of, from that vacated alley to the new University Street that would be added, but I don't get why that central plot of land on the red line goes right over is so crucial to all this. Why not make those the two plots of land on either side wider and then retain an alley? What's wrong with that alley?
I guess a response is that trying to figure out what I want to say. All of these lots, the design of the primary plat are designed and built consistent with the UDO and the overlay. And the additional alley going north and south or continuing at that really serves no purpose for what we would normally establish a right-of-way for. All of the lots have access. They all have vehicular access from an alley. There isn't a need. There's a potential, I'm hearing a concern about building footprints, but right-of-ways and alleys that's not the primary purpose for establishing a new alley.
So in other words, because I don't know that the question was, is it that the land itself should be developed rather than left as an alley?
I guess the response would be that that alley isn't needed. All of the lots have access to an alley without it, so it functionally provides no additional needed access.
But you're also vacating, I guess maybe I'm having trouble reading the east-west red line. Is there blue underneath it that I'm missing?
Yes, there
Okay.
is. So we are establishing
widening.
that east-west
Okay.
alley and maintaining that.
That's the part that was really confusing me. Thank you.
Yep. There's a lot to this map, and it's like. Sure.
Additional questions? Okay, seeing none, let's go to public comment on ordinance 2322. I'm not seeing a lot here in chambers, but if there is anyone, please approach the podium. Mr. Lucas, can you extend our invitation on Zoom, please?
Yes, if any members of the public wish to comment on this item, use the raise hand feature to let us know or send a chat to the meeting host.
Okay. And I'm not seeing anyone here in chambers.
See no hands in Zoom.
Okay, in which case, let's come back to council for any additional questions. Is that a hand?
No, it's not.
Okay.
Well, it is, but I'm not doing it.
Okay. In which case, any final comments? Okay, seeing none. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, that there were a majority of us who were concerned about the design in the past. I still don't think that my question was sufficiently answered. There doesn't seem to be any particular reason why. If that's not necessary, that's same is true for the alley that they would put back just south of what we're proposing to take out. So I find it to be arbitrary as well. And the idea that somehow if the east-west alley is narrow, but it's going to be widened, and the only thing that's in dispute is that one north-south alley. I'm not going to oppose it over that, but I do find it to be inexplicable and, again, arbitrary, and I don't like arbitrary decisions. So I'm just disappointed by that, but not enough to not support this. Thank you.
Any additional final comments? Seeing none, Deputy Clerk Crossley, will you please call the roll on ordinance 23-22?
Councilmember Volin,
Yes.
Rosenberger,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Scambolery,
Yes.
Rollo,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
and Smith.
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. Thank you, everyone. Okay. That takes us to legislation for first readings, including ordinance 2327. Mr. Lucas, there are some special circumstances surrounding this. Could you please comment on that?
Yes, I just wanted to note, in case it was the will of the council to not take up this item, that the council has the option to not introduce that tonight, and I also don't want to come across as though I'm advocating for this in case there are members that wish to take it up. But given the ordinance originated with the Plan Commission, only to have the Plan Commission give it a negative recommendation, I thought it would make sense to note that the council has the option to not introduce this ordinance tonight. If you decide through a vote to not introduce this, after 90 days from the date the Plan Commission certified the ordinance to the council, after the expiration of that 90 days, the ordinance would be considered defeated if the council fails to act. And so I just wanted to make that note. I believe it's planning staff's preference that the council not introduce this. However, if the council would like to take it up, they would be happy to come and present in 2 weeks. So happy to answer questions if there are any.
Councilmember Roller?
What was the vote of the Plan Commission?
I believe it was 6-3 to give the ordinance a negative recommendation.
Yes. Is it appropriate for me to make a comment?
And Councilmember Smith
Go ahead.
was
So
on behalf of Plan Commission, I mean.
Right. Yeah, this is Ron Smith, liaison to the Plan Commission for our council, and a member on that Plan Commission. So how this transpired, how this came about was there was discussion that there might be too many empty spaces on the ground floor of apartments that are around town and that are being built. And so what happened was it was Ms. Scanlon and her staff looked at all the existing apartment complexes this applied to, all the structures that this applied to, and found that if I believe the number was about 15% were empty, maybe, and not yet rented. And so the idea was going to be that we were going to reduce the amount to 30% instead of 50% on the amount that needed. It was required that was for commercial purposes. However, upon Ms. Scanlon's survey, found out that this was totally just not necessary to make any change, because it is not a problem as we thought. So in this case, it became moot that this was brought forward. And so after much robust discussion amongst us all, we voted it down because it was a solution in search of a problem, and there really isn't a problem with the ground floor commercial spaces.
Questions for
and
Councilmember Smith?
I would just offer that if the council is going to do anything more than a cursory discussion, discussion on the merits needs to be saved for when the ordinance is taken up. So if you'd like to take it up, you have that option.
Okay. What, Councilmember Boland?
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question of Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
So when you say that they suddenly discovered it wasn't a problem, could you define exactly what the problem was initially?
Well, there was anecdotal discussion that there was lots of space that wasn't being used.
For commercial, lots of first floor commercial space.
Correct. And upon survey by Ms. Scanlon, that's just not the case. So changing this is just unnecessary.
So you're saying that there was 15% that you thought was not in use. Did that number change when she reviewed it? And if so,
no, that's after her survey. It was very small, somewhere around 15%, way smaller than we expected. And so it was a great discussion and a good idea. And Ms. Scanlon did a fine job of finding out for us that, yeah, it's really not a problem.
I understand now. Thank you for the answer.
Yes, thank you. I would recommend that we just don't take it up.
And so I'll just note, if the council would like to consider the normal motion to introduce and take a roll call vote on that motion, through that action, you can decide whether or not to introduce this or not. And if you choose not to, and there's no further action within 90 days, the ordinance would be considered defeated.
Correct. Thank you. Is there a motion?
Madam President, I move that ordinance 2327 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the deputy clerk please call the roll on the motion to introduce?
Councilmember Flaherty,
No.
Rosenbarger,
No.
Sims,
No.
Peabon Smith,
No.
Scambolery,
No.
Rollo,
No.
Sandberg,
No.
Smith,
No.
and Bolin.
No.
And that fails 0-9.
Madam President, I
Thank
move.
you. Go on.
I
Sorry.
move that ordinance 2328 be introduced and read by the deputy clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the deputy clerk please call the roll on the motion to introduce?
Councilmember Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Peabon Smith,
Yes.
Scambolery,
Yes.
Rollo,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Bolin,
Yes.
and Flaherty.
Yes.
That motion passes. Will the deputy clerk please read?
Ordinance 23-28 to amend Title 15 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Vehicles and Traffic. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance amends Title 15 Vehicles and Traffic of the Bloomington Municipal Code and comes forth at the request of city staff, the Planning Commission, the Traffic Commission, and the Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Commission. The ordinance makes the following changes. Empowers the city engineer and the chief of police to make and enforce regulations necessary to effectuate the provisions of Title 15, removes 2 stop intersections and adds 6 stop intersections, allows two-way travel for bicycles on a portion of Henderson Street, decreases the maximum speed limit on a portion of 17th Street, adds back-end angle parking on P. Douglas Drive, adds no parking spaces on 8th Street, Southern Drive, Swain Avenue, Wilson Street, and 3rd Street, removes limited parking zones on Allen Street, 8th Street, Swain Avenue, and 3rd Street, and adds a limited parking zone on 3rd Street, adds a loading zone on the 2800 block of East Longview Avenue, and adds a bus zone to 3rd Street.
Thank you. And we'll take up ordinance 2328 at our regular session on October 18th. That takes us to our second of 2 periods of public comment. I'm not seeing anyone here in chambers, but Mr. Lucas, could you please extend our invitation on Zoom?
Yes, if any members of the public would like to speak, please let us know by raising your hand in Zoom or by sending a chat to the meeting host. And I see no takers.
Okay, then let's move to matters of council schedule.
Yes, just 2 reminders. The Council's Climate Action and Resilience Committee has a scheduled meeting next Tuesday at 7 p.m. And just another note for the Council and any public still watching that the Council's special session next Wednesday will serve as the adoption meeting for the items related to the 2024 budget. So looking forward to that next week. Thank you.
Is there anything else for the good of the order? Seeing none, we are adjourned.